So who does he want it for? Because I can
So
program it.
on the panels,
Like, does he want it for what do they have? Like, do you want to keep it when you're going to start?
yeah, I just need to figure out what time is like make sure I'm not going over too.
Um,
Or could someone like
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming today, and I want to also thank everyone who's watching the live stream as well. And welcome to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce's Technology Leadership Summit. My name is Tom Quadman. I'm Senior Vice President for Economic Policy at the Chamber, and part of my role at the Chamber includes overseeing our work on technology. This is our second summit, the first being our Global AI Forum, which we held here at the Press Club last year. During that summit, we discussed the U.S. Chamber of Commerce's AI Commission report, which focused on the need for risk-based rules for AI and investment in technological development to establish global leadership. At that summit last year, we also announced our Responsible AI Leadership program as well. This year, we're broadening the conversation, and the summit is entitled Compute to Compete. For America to compete against nations like China and others, we're going to have to establish leadership on our computing capacity and applications. For small and medium-sized businesses to compete against larger companies, they are already leveraging technology as a force multiplier. In other words, on many levels, competition is a good thing. And we're seeing this happening. Last week, the Chamber released our third annual Small Business Tech Report. Small businesses over the past year have doubled their use of AI technology. Over the past 3 years, that report has demonstrated how small businesses are expanding the number of tech platforms they are using. There's a direct correlation between the tech savviness of a small business and its growth and its success. So here we stand today at a critical juncture as we debate tech policy. Our policymakers are questioning funding for research and development. For example, the science portion of the CHIPS and Science Act, which the Chamber supported, has yet to be funded. What does this mean not only for technology, but for game-changing technologies such as quantum? Are we going to, and there are other questions out there as well, are we going to have the energy necessary to power America's economy? This is important as we use more technology and have to build a supporting infrastructure such as data centers. If anybody doesn't think that's a real thing, the Labour Party in the UK, that was the plank of their platform of how they're going to grow their economy, is data centers. How can we ensure that the massive benefits of AI and quantum, such as better health, better allocation of resources, solving vexing problems facing our society, can be achieved and shared by everyone throughout America? This is only possible if we have a thoughtful debate and leadership from both Congress and the White House. As we discussed last year, a gap-filling, risk-based approach to AI will address issues if needed, but also allow markets and innovation to flourish. National policies must achieve this goal and allow America to compete globally. We are currently seeing states attempt to create a patchwork of AI laws that could make it difficult for small businesses to comply and compete. And you don't have to look any further than today's Wall Street Journal editorial page, where there's an op-ed about why tort law should be used as a means to regulate AI. Tort law as a regulation really hasn't worked in the past and won't work here. Federally, we had to push back against data privacy laws that would stunt our ability to use data for good and the digital economy. The Chamber stands ready to protect AI and other innovations so that all Americans can reap its benefits and ensure economic and job growth. Today's summit will address these critical issues and shine a light on the environment needed so that all have access to the benefits of technological advances, including smaller businesses. We're going to be joined by the directors of the White House's Office of Science and Technology, the National Science Foundation, National Institute of Standards and Technology, to discuss how to keep our computing global leadership in place. I also want to thank our sponsors, especially Qualcomm, who will discuss the benefits of on-device AI. I also want to thank Google and Intuit for providing their voices today on the importance of AI for small businesses, as well as linking quantum with AI. With that, let's kick things off to discuss the role of the National Science Foundation. and the role and what they are doing in playing and furthering our computing needs. With that, I'm going to ask Michael Richards, our lead on all things AI, to come on board. Michael?
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Stretch all you. Well, thank you, Director, for being here.
Great to be here. Good morning.
Very, very early morning, so I know it's been an early morning for most of you, so I hope you've been able to get coffee and enjoy a little bit of the breakfast out front. But today's conversation that we're going to have, I'm actually really happy to be having, because a lot is happening, especially with the National AI Research Resource based on the executive order and the pilot program that's happening. But it seems Congress is actually really happy with the NAIR as well and trying to get things going. So I really want to start with the NAIR with you. And really start with, how does the NSF envision the NAIR's role in advancing U.S. competitiveness in AI research and development in relation to the rest of the scientific enterprise?
So, just to put this in context, NAIR was a task force that came into being a couple of years ago and started to draw out a plan, a report, if you may, that ended in a report, talking about various components of what we need to do to keep us in the leading edge, as you said,
Yep.
in terms of competitiveness. And more importantly, how do we unleash the amazing ideas, talent, and innovation in our nation? So NSF played a significant role in that,
Yep.
and along with other agencies, of course. You're going to hear from the NIST director, Dr. Laurie Lacosio, too. And it was co-led by the Office of Science, Technology Policy and the National Security Council. And out of that came this design of what we call the NAIR pilot.
Yep.
Right? So the president issued an executive order last October, and within 90 days, he had tasked NSF to working with other agencies, of course, NSF leading the charge and working with other agencies in partnership, and to develop a NAIR pilot that essentially makes possible democratization of AI. To the point that you raised, this is about how do we make sure that the AI talent and ideas are not limited to people who have the resources to be able to exercise those in the fullest form. How might we do it for places that don't have access to such resources? And then it becomes a responsibility of us to make sure that we have these resources made available. So the 90-day task for NSF was to bring this pilot into play. So we invested about $30 million, and I have to say, I was pleasantly surprised, and that's a great testimony to the great work done by folks at NSF, led by Katie Anibus from NSF, working with other agency leaders, and also testimony to the tremendous partnership mindset that is there among agencies, and this is something that people should know. We were able to bring 13 federal agencies and 26 non-governmental partners in 90 days, where partners like NVIDIA invested $30 million, equivalent of resources, Microsoft $20 million, Amazon $10 million. The who's who in AI, Anthropic, OpenAI, you name it, they were all part of that. From the federal agency perspective, NIST, DOE, NASA, you name it, all of them are part of this collective that we have brought together. Even more exciting is that in the next 30 to 60 days, we were able to launch on about 35 of those projects, but now it's at 115 projects. If you look at the kinds of projects, it's about model safety. It's about permafrost. How do we manage the permafrost? Yeah. Melting that is I saw firsthand in Alaska a few months ago, right? To pest detection. I mean, if you look at these projects, these are all not only how do we build a more trustworthy AI, safe, privacy preserving, yes, but also about how AI in various applications ranging from agriculture to transportation, to learning, climate, whatever that might be, how do we advance those ideas? And the crux of it all is two things, in my view. How do we, through this, then build the amazing talent that we need for not only industries of today, but the entrepreneurs of tomorrow and the industries of tomorrow? How do we get the talent ready? And how do we spread the innovation all across our nation, right? And rightly so, it's in every part of our nation, not just limited to a few places, as important as they are, California, Boston, and Texas, and others. So I hope I addressed at least some of the points that you were trying to raise through this question.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually want to drill down a little bit more into something you said, talking about democratizing and specifically about those who don't have the resources to start off with. So it might be good for you to talk about how NSF is considering ensuring equitable access to the NAIR across different types of institutions, including smaller universities, as well as unrepresented groups. I think that the work that's happening there is great, and it would be great for folks to hear about it.
No, that's a very, very good question. When I came to NSF about 4.5 years ago, one of the first design imperatives for me was to ensure that NSF is supercharging itself and working with steroids, if you may, to make sure that talent and ideas are democratized, which I said earlier, in rural urban areas, across the broad socioeconomic demographic, across the diversity of our nation, has the access to opportunities, educational opportunities, and that being made possible by the NSF support that goes to all kinds of institutions, right? We wanted to specifically make sure that institutions like the minority serving institutions, Research 2 institutions, and some of the Research 1 institution in states like the EPSCoR states, how do we ensure that access to those, to NSF, investments from those institutions, which then make possible talent that is embedded in those institutions, and the channeling through those institutions are given the opportunities, okay? So we have a number of programs at NSF, and also ensuring the success of those institutions being able to garner these resources from NSF. And we launched a program called Granted. I won't go into the details of that program, but what I wanted to spend time on is specific to your question on AI. So, for example, as part of NAIR, one of the objectives of NAIR is not only making possible algorithms, models, computing resources, software, and a range of application environments that we make possible for people. But a very important thing is how do we make sure the curriculum is available, all the way from high schools to community colleges and other institutions, of course, research institutions, and so on. So just last week, I was there in the Hill where we had a showcase for AI education, right? And we were showcasing the NAIR investments in, let me give you one example of a university there. It is the Southern Oregon University, as well as Mississippi Southern University. Right? I mean, these are universities that you don't necessarily think about when you think about how we need to invest. And I'm so pleased that when NSF's focus is on Chapman College, right, Clark Atlanta University, Southern Oregon University, and the Mississippi Southern University. So really, to ensure the talent are energized through that. So that's one pathway. Yep. We also launched an initiative called, aside of the NAIR, we launched an initiative specifically called Expand AI. Expand AI's investments are essentially to build curriculum in institutions that don't have the expertise that we need to have, and build the expertise, build the curriculum, and make sure that AI talent can be, trained through all kinds of institutions to be able to meet the demands. So I hope that.
No, that's extremely helpful. Going back to something you said beforehand about safe and secure artificial intelligence and using the NAIR to kind of do that, it'd be great to hear how NSF is balancing the need for open access AI and resources with the concerns about data privacy as well as security when it comes to the NAIR.
So this is something that NSF has been working on not just now, but several years in the past. And there's great work. I'm sure the NIST director will talk about that at length in terms of AI safety and so on. So what I will focus on is there are a number of programs at NSF. But before I go to the programs, I want to talk about NSF's crown jewel, as I call it. That is the Social Behavioral Economic Sciences Directorate at NSF. People hardly know that this is part of NSF, a significant part of NSF. In fact, many of the Nobel laureates in economics have gotten funding early in their career and sustained through their career by the SBE Directorate, Social Behavioral Economics Directorate. And so one of the things that we have done is to make the social behavioral economic sciences as an integral part, a thread, if you may, of all the activities that we do in advanced technologies like AI, like quantum, like advanced wireless, and so on, with the explicit mindset of how do we make sure that you're building responsible, trustworthy, privacy-preserving, and getting rid of bias that typically is a problem in these kinds of technologies, implicit biases. And so these collaborations between the directorates and therefore the community being invested for those kinds of activities is a great way of ensuring that we are addressing those issues. So I'll start right there. Then you go to specific programs. We have many programs. I'm just going to name a few. Safe learning-enabled AI investments that we have made, and the software investments that we make also in terms of responsible software development. Through our new TIP directorate, for example, we have launched what's called Red Dot, Responsible Design, Development, Deployment of Technologies. Right? We had a partnership with Amazon on trustworthy AI. So these are kinds of investments that we work together with partners, as well as what NSF does, as part of the core software development, core technology thinking, as well as specific technologies like AI and so on. Lot more needs to be done. Yep. And I always often say, being an AI and machine learning researcher myself, I often say that for long, we have looked at technology development and then trying to then address these societal issues and our policy issues and so on, safety issues, privacy issues and so on. It cannot be and should not be and must not be that way. It's got to be part of the design of the technology itself in the early stages rather than later band-aids being put. So we are seeing the effect of all of that. So we are taking lessons from this and seeing how the technologies of the future that we are building, not only of today that we are advancing like AI and quantum, but how do we make this as an integral part of the thinking of the evolution of new technologies?
Yeah. So obviously the executive order has the pilot program for the NAIR, obviously the $30 million that you indicated, as well as the resources that many of the business community has provided to the NAIR. But it'd be good to kind of talk about what the metrics NSF is looking at for success regarding the NAIR. Obviously, Congress is actively looking at passing and codifying this based on the report that happened not January, but the previous January beforehand. So we're getting close, and we're hopefully to get that across the finish line. But it would be good to kind of see and hear how you see the metrics being for success of the NAIR.
As you can imagine, if we said that NAIR is about democratization of access, you would expect the metric to be who are getting access to this? What kind of institutions? What kind of talent gets to touch it? What kind of curriculum gets deployed through NAIR that then inspires talent in many institutions that don't participate right now? Clearly, of course, you want to see how that solves problems, like problems in agriculture, like problems that we need to solve. Clearly, whether it is working towards building a more trustworthy AI, that would be a criteria. And then you'll have the typical criteria in the full-scale deployment. You would want to see how many publications, what kind of collaborations, what kind of partnerships, what kind of partnership resources you're bringing to the table, right? What kind of startups that you're creating, all of these, and what kind of licenses are being made possible to industry and so on. Those are what I call traditional metrics of progress. But I want to make sure in this situation that on top of the traditional metrics, you want these kinds of things that demonstrate the true purpose and the value that we established in terms of why we are doing this in the first place.
That's great. So we kind of talked about a little bit already about all the partners that NSF has had, be it federal agencies, you already talked about that, and bringing everyone else in. But there is a lot more to be bringing in, including the nonprofits, private sectors, and tech hubs. We're seeing a lot on that end, trying to use them as a democratizing force multiplier on this. So can you talk about how through tech hubs and really engines like that are being able to really implement the NAIR and push this outwards?
Oh, that's a fantastic question again. So when I talk about design imperatives that I had when I came in to the agency, I talked about access as one design imperative. The other design imperative I had was to see how we can democratize innovation all across our nation. And so we launched the Technology Innovation Partnerships Directorate called the TIP Directorate, the first new directorate in 31 years at NSF. We launched it rapidly. Number of programs in TIP Directorate. I would encourage you to check it out. We have the director of our TIP Directorate right here, Dr. Gyan Chandani. And he and his team have been working really hard at this. One of the exemplar programs of that is called the Regional Innovation Engines. That is, how do we ensure that place-based innovation is cultivated, nurtured, invested in, and built? Not just by NSF investments alone, but by bringing together investments from across a range of other partners. Right? So far, we have invested in about 60 such, in a rapid scale, 60 such innovation engines, type 1s as we call them, which is incubating those ideas all across our nation. I strongly encourage you all to go to RIE Engines and check out the map. It's all in the public domain. You will be amazed by the kinds of engines and what kind of innovation ideas that are being sort of brought up. So that's the first tier. Tier 2, or we call them type 2, is about 10 of those innovation engines, a little bit more mature, all across our nation again. And, for example, in North Carolina, it's around textiles or regenerative medicine, right? But you will find that through the 60 type 1s as well as the type 2s, it's no surprise that AI is a thread of all of that, or many of that. How are you going to then make that possible without NAIR-like resource being able to be accessible for those projects and programs to be able to leverage that and be able to take full advantage in order to be able to sort of advance their ideas. I'm very excited about the regional innovation engines, and what is even more exciting is the strong partnership we have on many levels with the Department of Commerce. The Undersecretary Lacosio and I work very closely together, our teams work very closely together. I'm really thrilled. I mean, Secretary Raimondo and I and the team works very closely together. Everybody, I mean, Commerce has been a huge supporter and partner for us. And when they were launching the regional technology hubs, I would say the regional innovation engines and regional technology hubs are not working like this, but working like that. Highly synergistic, highly symbiotic. If you look at the investments of the RT, the Regional Technology Hubs map, and you just overlay it on regional innovation engines, you will see how much of that leverages each other. That's how it should be. You want federal investments to work for the larger benefit. And I'm so excited that that's not only limited to our partnership with Commerce. Department of Energy partnership is phenomenal. In NAIR, for example, they've been a huge investor in terms of resources. Excited by Department of Energy partnership with NASA, partnership with NIH, partnership with Department of Education, partnership with DOD, DARPA. I can go on and on and on. You get the message. And out of the 27 AI institutes we launched in the last 3 years, check that out also, 27 AI institutes we launched just in the last 3 years. Each of them $20 million, $540 million of investment. Again, all across our nation, unbelievable ideas being advanced. Just last week I announced 2 of them were co-funded by Simons Foundation. Cosmic AI and Sky AI. And I'm so proud of this because the $540 million of investment, guess what? $320 million is NSF investment. $220 million is our partner's investment. On NAIR, right, you saw the partnership coming through, right? On any dimension you look at, you'll find that this partnership-based co-investment strategy for 2 reasons. 1, you want early buy-in. 2, you want these ecosystems and ideas to be sustainable and scalable into the future. You can't have sustainable, scalable systems built if NSF is the only investor and continue to invest. It cannot live and die by that. It's got to, grow and prosper. And that's what we do by the partnership investments. And I'm excited by what the first 10 Type 2 RIEs, we put in $150 million over 2 years. Our partners brought in $350 million. The total size is $500 million. That's the kind of spirit that NSF is bringing into play, partnership-based resources, investment, and growing and prospering these innovation ecosystems and building talent and ideas, and those talent being in a very inclusive way through institutions being brought into the picture. So I hope that gives you a reasonable summary of what we're doing.
Nothing happening there at all. I do want to switch lanes a little bit, and specifically get into AI and energy. Obviously, there's been a lot of news lately, specifically about how energy, usage in AI is, how important that is as far as getting the necessary energy for it. But NSF has a huge role in this, and especially the research that you're doing. So it might be good just to kind of give an overview about the foundational research NSF is doing on this front, as well as how we're able to maximize the AI benefits through making sure we have the necessary energy.
Well, excellent question. So let me give you some data points which might be interesting to all of you. And I'm a geek, so I'm going to live by data and information.
I think you're with the right crowd
rather
for
than
that.
hype and all of that. Currently, 4% of our energy, nation's energy, is consumed by our AI, kind of. And is expected to grow to 9% by 2030. Okay? I'll just pause for a moment. Process this. This is unsustainable if we grow at this rate, unless we have ideas and plans. The energy consumption will increase. Let me give you another data point. A Google search versus a ChatGPT query, 10 times more energy, ChatGPT search. So people just put in a ChatGPT search, they think it's all fine. But if they are green folks, mindful of this, they would think twice before putting a ChatGPT query. Okay? So put it out there. Now, NSF has been investing in a lot of things that optimizes the energy, not only in the context of now, but over several decades. how do you build low power electronics? How do we build low power semiconductor solutions? How do we build so low power software? And how do we build optimized parallel processing, kind of approaches? NSF has been investing heavily on this. But let's talk about also investment related to AI. We know that the consumption is based on this humongous amount of data thrown at problems with humongous amount of processors consume energy. And we also invest in terms of, is that the best way of solving every problem? We all know the answer is absolutely not. There are problems that can be solved by grafting onto, models and, therefore, being more energy efficient and using specific data sets so that they are smaller in size and more contextualized for the problem that we are solving. So we are investing in all these kinds of interesting strategies to see how we can build lower power solutions as we think about the future, okay? And on a range of things, all the way from devices to technologies, and of course quantum, we will not have a chance to talk about it. We run out of time. But all these kinds of newer computing models are also energy efficient, and so how might we think about those kinds of things, mapping AI algorithms? So I saw a signal coming in here saying you're done, buddy.
I think we are done.
Yeah,
so, Director, really appreciate the time to talk, and
thank you.
Thank you for all
Michael.
your great work.
Yeah, thanks. Really appreciate it.
Sadly, we didn't get to quantum, but I know Tom Quadman will have the opportunity to talk a little bit about that with NIST. So for our next fireside conversation, we have Building America's Computing Capacity with Director Lori Ocasio and Tom Quadman. So please come on up.
Director, thank you.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, appreciate
And
it.
really happy to follow the director of NSF. He's one of my favorite people.
Well, and you work very well in partnership together.
We do.
And I was going to say, too, I've had long titles at my time at the Chamber. You have a very long title, so
Yeah.
you have me beat, so
Yeah.
you've got a lot of responsibility. And before we start, I just want to thank you and your staff for your openness and having a dialogue. I know you receive a lot of letters from us. We have a lot of meetings together. I think that dialogue has been very, very fruitful. So one, I want to thank you for that. And two, I know we've got a lot to talk about in a short amount of time. So what I'd like to do is also extend to you, because I know we're not going to get through everything, is maybe you can join us at one of our public meetings of our AI working group, which has over 200 companies. Maybe we can finish the conversation there.
I would love that. And I also want to thank you for the open communication and continuing to give us input and comments and feedback. It's really, really helpful for us. So thank you.
Sure thing. Yeah. So let's talk about, there's a lot going on, right? But let's just talk from the 30,000 foot level for a second. How do you see the public sector and the private sector working together to ensure that we've got U.S. leadership both in terms of AI and quantum?
Yeah, so that's a really important question, because the public and private sector, I think there's just really a couple things we need to keep in mind. First, we have to invest, right? Other countries around the world are really deeply investing in these technologies. They're critical technologies for our economic future and our national security, right? So we need to remember that both the public sector and the private sector have to invest. So I appreciated your comments at the outset on the science part of the CHIPS and Science Bill. Second, we need to partner. Director Panchanathan mentioned this several times, partnership. We use partnership very strategically as we're engaging in AI and quantum. Later, I'll mention, a way that we're working specifically with AI Safety Institute Consortium. But in quantum, for decades, we've had really clear partnerships with universities that are joint institutes that we form, where universities are there. They put their best faculty there, and NIST puts some of our best researchers there, and they co-locate and both institutes co-invest. For us, that has been an incredible way to really leverage our dollars, the federal taxpayer dollars, against other dollars to try to really amplify our efforts. And it has been a tremendous strategy for NIST to be successful, particularly in quantum, as we have a joint quantum institute with the University of Maryland and JILA with the University of Colorado. And then, I think the third way is, so besides investment and besides partnership, I think we really need to think of how to strategically engage in standards. Now, a lot of people they think standards are kind of a little like, why, but standards underpin trillions of dollars of trade.
Yep.
And they're critically important to our commerce. And so we just have to engage as we're developing new technologies. If we do the right investments, our technologies blossom, right, and grow and get to be the best in the world. And we need to bring those to the standards table to negotiate those as international standards that other people accept. It's important in quantum, it's important in AI, it's important in really every critical and emerging technology that can be critical to our economy and our economic future.
Yeah, no, and Michael and Jordan are going to roll their eyes when I say this, but one of the things I talk a lot about is, to your point of, international policy is important, domestic policy is important, standards are extremely important. And by the way, that's the same policy rubric we use for electrical appliances, which is why you're fine with using your appliances in your kitchen, right?
Absolutely.
And it's the same concept.
Yeah, absolutely. It really ensures, we talk about trust. It ensures trust in the products that you're purchasing. It ensures trust as you are developing and growing them and growing these new technologies. And so it allows, if you have something to compare it against, when your product is better than the other one. So standards and really the underpinning of measurement science is critical to everything that we do in this country, ensuring trust.
So I want to get back to the institutes in a second because I want to have a conversation on that. But before we get there, last year President Biden signed Executive Order 14110, right? The Safe and Secure, Trustworthy Artificial Intelligence Executive Order.
Right.
That task missed with doing a lot, right? So can you talk a little bit about what you're doing in terms of best practices, safety, strengthening American leadership? Sort of talk about that because it's a very broad waterfront with, what you were given through that EO.
Yeah, it is. It is a very broad number of taskings for NIST, and we're really proud to be a part of that. I'll say that it didn't come out of nothing, the fact that NIST is in the center of that. We had released the AI Risk Management Framework in January last year, and that AI Risk Management Framework has become really the touchstone for a lot of organizations to adopt as they're thinking about how to use AI in their innovations, how to deploy AI, what are the risks associated with AI, and how do you mitigate them. And because of that, and because of our process and the way we developed it, which was really open, transparent, let's engage as many people as possible. Anybody who's interested in AI and deployment of AI, come engage with us, and we'll develop this document together. And because of that process, deployment and uptake was actually really rapid for that particular document. Because of that, we had been put really as a centerpiece in the EO on safe, trustworthy, and responsible AI and secure AI. And so one of the things that we are doing, there are multiple things that we're doing. Let me just mention a few of those.
Sure,
so
please.
First, because we developed this AI risk management framework, and the generative AI, of course, has its own new, very unique risks, we developed a framework to think about, okay, now if you were going to adopt Gen AI in your organization, here's some of these special risks you need to think about if you're going to deploy generative AI. That, again, community came together and thought about, the really important risks associated with Gen AI. Some harmful bias, clearly, misinformation or information security, information integrity. But there are about a number of special risks really associated with Gen AI that any organization needs to think about and consider how to measure them, how to mitigate those risks. Next, synthetic content. Yeah, that's critical. We have to know if the image that we're looking at is created, is not the native image, but is created using AI. And so we developed a document where we are talking about synthetic content transparency. How do you know if it is AI generated? How do you then detect that it's AI generated? And then I think that's a really important document. We've got a lot of public comment on our synthetic content document. Everybody is clearly very concerned about that, especially right now in light of elections coming. And then the next, I'll just mention one other, which is a document related to AI standards, global standards engagement. I mean, people don't want a bifurcated world, right? We want to create the rules of the road for AI, and we want to do it globally so that if you're doing business in another country, they don't have completely different ways that they're dealing with AI. We really need to come together globally and work with partners to think about how to have the best rules of the road for deploying and using AI and developing AI.
Yep. So let's get back to the institutes for a second.
Yeah.
Right? So, you've had, you have the Artificial Intelligence Safety Institute, the Artificial Intelligence Safety Institute Consortium. So can you talk a little bit about the institute and what it's doing? But can you also talk a little bit too about, there are a number of other institutes, right, that other countries have, UK, et cetera. Can you also talk about what the interaction with those institutes is as well?
Sure. Yeah, so when we stood up the AI Safety Institute, first we knew that it's a big problem, right? The science behind safety of AI deployment there isn't a science there yet, right? So when we stood up the AI Safety Institute, we knew that we had to develop the science behind AI safety. And we needed to do that with partners, right? Because this is a big problem. So the AI Safety Institute is really set up to study the science behind AI safety, to do test and evaluation, particularly pre-deployment of the most advanced models, and also develop guidelines that others can use when they need to test their models. But we also launched an AI Safety Institute consortium. There are 290 partners right now in that consortium. Again, this idea that public-private partnership is so critical. This is not something we can do alone. And so the developers are part of that. A lot of people who are interested in deploying it, for instance, in finance and healthcare, across many different sectors, are part of our conversation. Civil society is part of our conversation. And together, we are really going to do this work so that it can be the best possible work with the best possible outcome. And then also last year, we announced the launch of the AI Safety Institute's consortia. This is really a network of AI Safety Institutes, a global network. We already have been partnering with the UK AI Safety Institute. We have an MOU to do joint testing, to share best practices, to really start to develop our approach. Broadening that into a larger network, again, is very critical because we don't want one part of the world thinking about it very differently than another part of the world. Of course, there will be nuances, right? We have our values. Other people have other countries have their values. But we need to have the basics that we develop together. And we think a lot about how to develop that together so that when a company wants to do business in Singapore, they're coming at it in a similar way and with a similar approach as the US. And so that's the goal of this network, is to really think about how can we partner closely so that this network of safety institutes can advance the science together, accelerate the science, sometimes partner in testing so that a company might not have to go here, here, and here, and here. So it's really, I think it's a great benefit for the world. And I know it's something that the Chamber has been very vocal about partnering.
Yeah, and with that, because I was thinking about, as we were, getting ready for this morning, really from the start, obviously we do a lot here in the United States, both in the federal and state level, But, we have had extensive meetings in UK, Ireland, EU, South Korea. Last year when we had our summit here, we had members of the EU Parliament, Japanese Diet here, right? So, and very often in those conversations, there's a lot of discussion of, well, we trust the United States, right, in terms of shared values, democratic values, so it's important for us to work together. One of the questions, I just want to lean in a little bit further on those discussions, because, of course, the other part of it is the frontier developers in AI are really American companies, right? So there's, how does the Safety Institute here in the United States, are there any concerns about the disclosure of models of American companies and how they want to do that? And how do you work with your international partners to ensure that our companies aren't being disadvantaged?
Yeah, so that question really spells out why we have to work together. We have to do it. Companies just don't want to have to deal individually with each country around the globe with whom they do business. And they will, obviously, there will be nuances, but if we can get these core things down, how you measure safety, how you evaluate safety, it's really going to be the benefit to our companies, but really to all companies globally who want to do business with the United States as well.
Right. So to some degree for American companies, you're going to be like a one-stop shop.
Yeah.
In a way.
That's our intention for sure.
Yep.
Yeah.
So let me shift gears a little bit. And this is, I want to talk about quantum. Because quantum is, maybe amongst the crowd here, right? I think is a crowd that pays a lot of attention to it.
Yeah.
But there's a lot going on there. So can you talk a little bit about what NIST's role with quantum is, and how do you see that developing?
Sure. So we have been in this business for a long time. Quantum is my other passion. I love talking about quantum as much as I love talking about AI. But we have been in this field for decades, mostly because we have been developing quantum clocks for quite a while. Our quantum clocks are now the most accurate in the entire world, and actually are going to lead to the redefinition of time on the global scale, which is redefinition of the second on the global scale. That's because we're the National Metrology Institute for the United States, and so we contribute to global time. So we know quantum. We've been working in it for a long time. We work really from the basic research to applications research, all the way to manufacturing for quantum. And I'll talk about those three areas in a minute. But some of our basic research has led to 4 Nobel Prizes at NIST in quantum. And so that really basic fundamental work, we tend to partner, and it has now really provided the underpinnings for really every major quantum computing effort in the United States. So we're really excited about how our work has led to the emergence of the potential quantum market, especially in quantum computing, and now also in quantum sensing. We continue to do a lot of research and basic research and development in quantum sensing and quantum networking and quantum computing. But also we formed the Quantum Economic Development Consortium, and that was the result of the National Quantum Initiative when that was born, or when that was passed. We birthed the Quantum Economic Development Consortium, and that's a really cool thing because that brings together hundreds of companies who are interested in developing products that are in the quantum market, emerging quantum market, and also their associated supply chain. And so we have everybody in a room together who can talk about what the emerging quantum market needs, how we can support them, how we can support the supply chain for the United States as things come to market. So we really work across what I would say the continuum, all the way from basic research to helping manufacturing get developed and deployed in the United States.
One question I wanted to ask with quantum as well is, obviously, right, as with AI and with quantum, we're sort of really scratching the surface, right? But with quantum, when I talk with members about it, there's a lot of discussion about cryptology, cybersecurity, right? And that sort of is viewed as that's the first wave of issues we're going to have to deal with. So can you talk a bit about the work that NIST is doing on that? Because I think that's something that a lot of companies, even outside of the quantum space, are beginning to concentrate on.
Sure. Actually, it was interesting because when I first became director, the CHIPS Act was passed in August, and I ran into a really CEO of a large semiconductor company, and I thought they were going to say, so I want the CHIPS money, and instead they said, when are your quantum cryptography standards coming out? And I thought, oh, wow, that was unexpected. So they did this summer. So I talked about innovation and how we support innovation in quantum, but we are also on the protect side. So we've been thinking about this since 2016. If a quantum computer does come to market, and it's a very powerful quantum computer, it has the potential to break our old cryptography. And so therefore exposing a lot of the secrets that we don't want to have exposed. And so since 2016, we've been working on the development of standards to protect the data that you have, a new way to protect the data in light of the fact that a quantum computer could come onto market at any time. And some people predict that it's going to come onto the market and we'll have a very powerful quantum computer in 5 years, powerful enough to break these, our encrypted messages. Some people think 100 years. That's a broad range, right? But we bank on the 5 years, so we're working really hard to make sure, because you never know when the great leapfrog technology is going to happen, and you will all of a sudden have a very powerful technology, like happened in AI, right? That's what happens with emerging technologies. So we're ready. We released the 3 standards this summer, and we are trying to help companies get, and the United States government be able to incorporate these standards to protect our data. Yeah.
So I think I see we've got our blinking light. So, Director, thank you.
Thank you.
And as I said, I'd like to invite you back maybe to talk with our AI working group.
I love that.
So we appreciate the partnership, and you're welcome at any time.
Thank you. And I just wanted to say I appreciate your support of the science research funding in this country. It's
We've
really
got a little bit
important.
more work to do on that one.
Well, thank you.
So thank you.
All right.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Director Lucasio, for your leadership on these critical issues. My name is Jordan Crenshaw. I'm Senior Vice President of the Chamber's Technology Engagement Center, and I have the pleasure of introducing our next panel. This is going to be one that focuses kind of on a new frontier of the use of AI. We're calling it off the cloud, on-device AI. And I want to thank our sponsor, once again, Qualcomm, for their work with today's summit as well. So with that, I would like to introduce Durga Maladi. He is the Senior Vice President and General Manager of Technology Planning and Edge Solutions at Qualcomm. And he's going to have a conversation today with Neil Chilson, Head of AI Policy at the Abundance Institute. So let's give them a warm round of applause, and I'll welcome our panelists to the stage.
Well, Durga, I am super excited to have this conversation. Thanks to the U.S. Chamber for having us here today. A bit of a confession, I know Qualcomm well from my time in the telecom space. I kind of understand how it worked in that ecosystem, but I don't know nearly enough about how Qualcomm is working in the AI space. So I'm really excited to ask you some questions, get some of that information, and share it with this audience. So maybe we can just jump in right there. Obviously, there's been an explosion in AI innovation and investment since ChatGPT came onto the market. But Qualcomm has created a really unique space for innovation in communications and computing long before November 2022. So can you tell me a little bit about what Qualcomm is doing in the AI space? And in particular, I'm curious, From your unique position, what are you guys seeing in the AI space that other people aren't?
First of all, thanks for having me here. This is what you mentioned earlier about our DNA and our heritage in terms of communications. It's not a new question per se, but the truth is that ever since maybe the tail ends of the around 2007, 2008 timeframe, we've invested very heavily on energy efficient high performance computing. That's what actually, if you kind of think about it, if you just focus on a smartphone, for instance, what really matters is it's a system on a chip. Everything is a combination of extremely high performance computing, whether it's your camera, whether it's any of the other processing that occurs, together with energy efficiency. As it turns out that most of our devices, whether it's a laptop or a smartphone or any of the consumer or industrial IoT devices, they all happen to have power constraints. And so it's kind of important to have that background, because when we touch upon AI, as we are moving into AI workloads running on device, AI in devices has evolved very differently compared to AI in the cloud. It's kind of important to understand that, and there's lots of reasons for that. So from our perspective, as our investments over the last decade and a half actually grew, starting from about 10 years back when it was all classical AI, image processing and voice processing and so on, but when November 30th of 2022 is when ChatGPT was introduced, and most of the mainstream people immediately saw AI coming to them. And by Christmas of 22, I think everyone was asking each other, hey, did you try this? Did you try this? And well, that was a very large model. It's about 175 billion parameters. And if you were to just do the arithmetic, it takes up about 350 gigabytes of memory. And you surely cannot fit that in a device. But what we are seeing from since then, we've made a decisive move towards bringing generative AI running directly on devices, smartphones and PCs as a starting point. You saw this summer a lot of AI PCs and Copilot Plus announcements that came in. But we are seeing two different trend lines from AI on devices. The first one is the models are getting smaller but extremely competitive against the larger models. Let me explain that. That GPT 3.53 and 3.5 that was used 175 billion parameters from 2 years back. Today, a less than 10 billion parameter model can outperform that model out there. It's the equivalent of, not quite, but the equivalent of a Moore's law in semiconductors and in AI space for us. Smaller models are getting more efficient in terms of the performance, the language understanding performance, which means you can bring those models directly running on devices. The second thing is power consumption, energy consumption matters. It is perhaps the most important thing in devices that you and I use. So we have a very unique vantage point and a position in terms of looking at the entire landscape of how we bring AI inference into devices.
So you talked a little bit about the benefits there of on-device in particular, and the challenges, right? So the energy consumption, the need to be able to fit it into a small space. Those are sort of the technical benefits. Can you talk a little bit about maybe some of the consumer benefits or the user benefits? Because I think this technology, we're talking about devices. I think people are assuming phones, but I guess it could be lots of different devices too. So can you just talk a little bit about the other types of consumer benefits to
Absolutely.
that type of technology?
Let's actually start with smartphones and then go to PCs, and then we'll go into maybe automotive. That's a different space, and not necessarily autonomous driving. So let's take smartphones. Starting from earlier this year when Samsung, I'm just picking one example, announced their Galaxy S24, and since then the Flip and the Fold, they had a couple of very interesting features that were actually brought in. One of them is called Live Translate. You and I can talk in two different languages, and what I speak actually gets translated into the language that's of interest to you in real time. And actually it's a combination of a model, a generative AI model that first actually translates my voice into text. Then there's another model that translates that text into the language of your choice, and then it gets transmitted to you. And if you kind of think about it, this is in real time. We're not talking of like seconds of delay in the midst of it. It's one example.
So that latency is a major benefit of on-device.
It's a huge one, and in fact, it's like a sub-second latency that you see, which is kind of huge. The second part is we specifically focused on productivity use cases on PCs. In most enterprises, software engineering, for example, is going through a massive transformation. We will very soon, with these AI PCs, we are reaching a point where instead of constantly writing code over and over again, you actually simply say that I want to write this piece of code, and code gets generated. It's like a pretty good starting point. It's not like it's something amateurish and you have to then work a lot into it. It's like 95% there, and then you have to do some minor adjustments, which means as a software engineer in engineering organizations, you focus a lot more on algorithms, and the actual mundane task of coding gets done by these generative AI-based applications. A third example, and this is kind of a fun one, which is in automotive. Let's keep autonomous driving aside for now. Digital cockpit is something that we have been working on for a long period of time. But what that really means is instead of navigating in a very tactile way with your fingers on the screen in front of you, you simply speak, and every response actually just comes back. Voice is becoming a natural interface, a very natural UI towards the device around you. So next time you get a flat or something like that, gone are the days where you would look into a physical user manual in the glove compartment. Nowadays you see some PDF format of that on the screen, but even that is irrelevant. You can just say, okay, what do I need to do, and out come the instructions in a step-by-step manner. So these are three different kinds of use cases that are already emerging, and we have lots more coming up with AI agents as we move forwards.
That sounds so useful. I can just imagine asking my car how to adjust my seat. I know every time I get into a new car, it takes me forever to figure that out. But the on-device, the point around the voice as an interface is really interesting, right? So we're so used to using our phones right now as like using separate apps that are on there. What I'm envisioning when you talk about this is this sort of ecosystem where maybe the AI is the primary interface, maybe it's voice-driven, but then apps sort of recede into the background. That's quite a transformation in paradigm, and could be pretty disruptive to how business is operated now. How do you think about how do we get from here to there?
So we're actually, I wouldn't say we are there, but we're almost there in terms of everything that you mentioned. So first things first, voice has become now the de facto natural interface towards devices. In fact, already that's the case. So one of the important things is that when you pick up a phone today, all of us have had the same kind of an experience for the last 15 years or so. You pick up the phone, you navigate through a clutter of apps all of us have on our devices, then you click on something. It's a very tactile interface, as I mentioned. So last year, we actually showed a demo in which you can actually bypass all of that and simply use voice and keep talking to your device all the time. I know it sounds a little awkward, but actually you're just talking to your phone most of the time. So one example that we gave was a person would simply say, find an airline reservation for me. I want to go from Maui to San Diego, preferably on Sunday afternoon. And then within a second, you get the response back saying, okay, analyzing, yeah, I saw there's two reservations, one for United, one on American. I see that you have status on United. Do you want me to go ahead with that? Say, well, you know what, the price is a little higher. I have a little more flexible 2 or 3 days. Then you keep conversing till you reach a point, okay, this is the reservation. Shall I book it for you? Yes, done. If you kind of think about it, that involved a lot of AI processing, voice getting converted to text, text actually being used. The apps are still there, but they're not the interface to the user anymore. They're kind of deep underneath within. That means as this interface between humans and devices changes, I think we are entering a domain where, yeah, it's kind of disruptive in one way, but at the same time, it enables a very large cross-section of the population. In fact, just last year, I was here in DC for one of the summits, and at the end of what I spoke, one person came up to me, and he was visually impaired, and he said, smartphones we kind of saw them come, but we never could use them quite as much, but voice is a natural UI, I can actually use it. So I think we've made devices very smart, but we've also made it harder for humans to use it. This interface can fundamentally transform that. So that's a big thing. And the second part is personalization of AI. So let me give a different example. Where you actually say, when was the last time I had my physical appointment with, and actually what it does is there's an agent, and that's a new way of working now with AI agents, almost like someone saying, how can I help you? And you ask this question, that agent has to fetch some local information, maybe extremely private information in a secure vault inside your device, fetches that context from there, picks the right kind of a model, processes it, and sends back that information to you. That changes things in a very different way.
So you touched on so many things there that are interesting to me from a policy perspective. And so could you just talk a little bit about, as AI becomes this sort of always available service that's crossing different devices or is embedded in different devices, your car, your phone perhaps, maybe other ones, your PC, what is the broader policy implications maybe around, you mentioned privacy, for example, as a key one, maybe content authentication, energy efficiency you mentioned. So how should policymakers be thinking about this world of on-device AI models as different, and what are the specific policy implications of that they might not be thinking about now?
So that's an important question, and I want to actually break it down into three parts. One is on privacy, one is on authentication of the content that is actually generated in the device, and the third part is related to safety. So let's actually touch upon. The privacy part is very important in the sense that the more information that is used by AI models, the more accurate and relevant is the response that you actually get from there. And keep in mind that we are no longer, when we talk of generative AI, we are not talking of text in and text out. We are firmly into this domain called multimodal models, which means you use a combination of voice and text and images. You can pick up your phone and point in a certain direction and you say, what am I looking at? And if you kind of think about it, the question itself is meaningless unless someone says, well, where are you? Okay, that's location. Second, which direction are you looking at? That's kind of orientation in terms of, and so there's sensors information that comes in. So there's a lot of data that is extremely contextual and perhaps also very private. You might not be willing, as an end consumer, you might not be willing to share all that information. So data privacy matters. So from a policy perspective, where do the consumers, do they understand exactly what is happening? And when you run it on device, it turns out that the processing and the data is locally stored. You don't actually keep sending this information back. So it's kind of important for policymakers to understand that. That's very different from the cloud in that sense. Let me go to another extreme, and which is on safety. One of the questions that has come up in the last 1.5 years or so is, how safe is an AI model? Now, by the way, as Qualcomm, we don't create AI models. We are enabler of model inference, AI model inference on devices. And I just came back from Europe, and I had conversations in so many different, there are lots of AI models that are coming up in different countries, in Japan, in Korea, in France. In addition to all the models that are coming up over here, they're very proud of the fact that these AI language models, they preserve the culture and the heritage of the language. So they want to do foundational model training and so on. But when we see all of this, one question that comes up is, how is it safe? Who decides it is safe? For the longest period of time, I think every model creator has had their own sets of guardrails and benchmarks in which they say, we believe that this model is safe. And that's probably right. But I think it would be very helpful to have like a standardized way of saying, here's a benchmark, and which is kind of universally agreed upon. Not necessarily every single detail, but some basic principles. And if you actually start with that, then it's easy for someone to say, okay, this model, you're running it on device. Is it safe? Yeah, I already passed these benchmarks. It is very good. Bear in mind that when we do generative AI on devices, we are talking of everything ranging from smartphones to your doorbell to industrial equipment. So yeah, there is an element of trust that comes in. There's a bit of FUD sometimes that's against AI saying, is it safe or not? Well, this actually tries to alleviate that to an extent by saying, here's a standardized benchmark which policymakers can say would be helpful, and then go from there. So that's a different perspective. Somewhere in between, I mentioned safety and privacy is authenticity. And that one is actually relatively easy to solve from our perspective. And we've partnered with a few players in this space. So for instance, when you see a picture and you ask a question these days, deep fake, which by the way is a strange name, because every time you take a picture, if you just alter it slightly by improving the lighting, is that a fake picture? Not really. It seems like it's real. But we're not talking of that one. But you do have two other variations of that. One is you take a picture and you just change the background completely. Maybe it's cloudy and raining, and instead you just make it bright and sunny. But it's the same person in the picture. That would be an augmented version of the picture. I wouldn't quite call it as a deep fake, but yes, it's not quite that. It's somewhere in between. And then the last one is text to image. It's a purely synthetic image. None of that actually exists. It was just created using perhaps a diffusion model going from text to an image. As Qualcomm, we are in a position to say which one is which and provide a certificate of authenticity behind it. It's a stamp that goes in with that, and we partner with our TruePic is one of the partners with whom we worked on. And so every time you see an image, and that's just a starting point, you get to know, yep, this is an actual real image versus this is a purely synthetic image, or this is some kind of an augmented image somewhere in between. So this is important for policymakers to understand, because there are ways of figuring out what is authentic and what is not. And then we can go from there.
So it's very, very interesting, and I think it speaks to Qualcomm's unique position. But I do want to ask you to make it a little bit more concrete. You mentioned Qualcomm is an enabler of models. So there isn't a Qualcomm AI model specifically, but you're an enabler of models. Can you talk just about, like, what does that actually mean? Like, what is Qualcomm's role in getting a model to work on, say, an iPhone?
So when we take any kind of an AI model which is out there, what we do is we make sure that it runs in an extremely energy efficient manner in processors. So that's the transformation that we actually have to do. You can't take the model as is. It turns out that you have to do a few other things, like you have to compress the model a little bit. You've got to quantize it so that it runs very efficiently. That means that there's a preliminary work that needs to be done, and then map it to specific use cases. And allow app developers or developers in general to have like a rich menu of models to pick from, because some models tend to be better for some kind of tasks and other models happen to be better in other kinds of tasks. So what we do is bring a combination of software and tools together with the hardware processing capabilities that enable these platform makers. So our customers go anywhere from smartphone OEMs like example Samsung, PC OEMs like Dell, HP, Lenovo, and Microsoft. In automotive, we have all the automotive companies that work with us on the digital cockpit. Industrial and consumer IoT, from doorbells to everyone, they all have a different variation of these processors with whom. So that's why we are a horizontal player, gotcha, right? But we do provide tons of software and tools to make sure that anyone can bring your own model. It's okay. There are more than 900,000 models that are available on Hugging Face today. Pick any one of those models. Our job is to make sure that every model on the planet runs very efficiently. Every Gen AI model on the planet runs very efficiently on our processors.
That's great. That really helps clear it up for me. So much of the conversation around AI is focused on these giant models being developed in giant data centers that are expensive to generate or to train, but also expensive to run inference on. And I think that's sort of the policy frame that a lot of I think last count there's 700 plus state and federal laws that have or proposed laws that have something to do with AI. So the policy frame that I think a lot of people are bringing to it is this in the cloud model of AI. What's different? I mean, what are the specific things that you think people might be missing out on? What are the policy opportunities to get this right? And how do we make sure that we have a policy environment that allows for a wide range, a diversity of approaches to AI rather than narrows in on one specific set?
So when you take a look at one of the things that I mentioned earlier on is energy efficiency. And so I think it's still relatively, it's not very well understood by everyone. Those of us who've been driving this in devices, we know this very well. Just to give an example, when you take an extremely large model, like a 10 billion parameter model, and run it on a smartphone, the power consumption in that during that workload is less than that of an LED light bulb. Now just think about it. We're talking of like 5 to 6 watts. I mean, that's like seriously low compared to what you see in the cloud. And that's because that's been the heritage of anything that you run on devices. So there have been studies which indicate that if you just let everything run in the cloud, AI inference run in the cloud, then the power consumption, the energy consumption is very high. 3.5% of world's electricity can be consumed by that. But it is important to therefore understand that you don't have to have everything running on the cloud, just like you don't have to have everything running on device. There is a hybrid model that's emerging where a lot of the training can be done in the cloud, a lot of the inference can be done on devices, and there are hybrid models in between. You distribute the workload across a combination of devices and servers and the deep cloud, and that allows for us to have a good leash in terms of the overall energy consumption when it comes to generative AI. Because the fact is that generative AI is here to stay. It is perhaps the most disruptive technology that we can think of right now. And because it is running on devices, tons of end consumers are going to be using generative AI, and distributing that workload is probably key. To answer the question on the policy side, I think it comes down to a combination of education and studies. Try to see exactly where the balance needs to be, and then make sure that we have the right policies in place to spur that.
Well, I am red-green colorblind, but I think those lights are telling us that our time is up. I really appreciate it. It's been great to talk to you, and I hope the audience learned a lot.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
At this time, we're going to take a quick 5-minute break, so please get some coffee, get some food, and use the restroom, and we'll be back in 5 minutes. Thank you. All right, if everyone wants to take their seats, we'll get going in about 1 minute. All right, we are going to get started with our next panel. Our next panel's name is Empowering Small Businesses to Compete. I would like to call up now Michael Kennedy, as well as Shirley Boubert-Rumble, and then finally Jordan Crenshaw, Senior Vice President of Chamber Technology Engagement Center, for a empowering conversation.
Well, good morning. Really appreciate seeing everyone today. As we have our theme of today's event, Compute to Compete, we could not have an event like this without a conversation about small businesses' ability to compete with technologies like AI. And today's conversation comes on the heels of the release of our third edition of our Empowering Small Business Report. That report dives into small businesses around the country, how they're using technology, things they're concerned about, how they're using tech. At this year's report, we actually feature 2 Intuit partner small businesses, so I encourage folks to view that at uschamber.com. But I also wanted to briefly do some top lines about some of the findings that we had and then set up a conversation with Michael and Shirley about small business use of AI. I think it's really interesting to note, as Tom mentioned, that use of generative AI doubled in the last year for small businesses. So 40% of small businesses are using generative AI. But I think a very interesting note to point out, when you ask small businesses about the types of technology that they're using, without mentioning things like generative AI, 98% of small businesses are in some way using an AI-enabled tool. So that's 50% of small businesses are unaware actively that AI is powering their small business. Now, a few things I think that's interesting to note. Most right now are using AI for things like marketing and communicating with customers. And from a policy standpoint, 76% of small businesses believe that limiting access to AI will harm their operations. And a majority are concerned about a state-to-state patchwork of AI laws emerging this year. I think another note, too, is really interesting as we're beginning to see states pass new laws, is that only a third of small businesses self-identify as very well prepared to comply with regulations. So we at the Chamber believe if it's good for small business from a regulatory standpoint, it's good for the economy. And so with that, I really want to kick off our conversation today. We have Michael from Intuit. We also have Shirley from USource. Shirley, I want to start with you. Can you tell me a little bit about your business, how you got started?
Sure. I established USource about 9 to 10 years ago. Prior to that, I spent maybe about 25 years in community development and working as a government official prior to making the leap. USource, as I say, adopts a real holistic approach towards the construction process. We really focus in on being real partners to our clients. Because of the experience I've had, broad experience, we make sure that our clients are really benefiting from that broad platform and helping them with identifying solutions early on, even before construction can begin. We're looking at ways to maximize outcome, ways to really streamline the process, ways to manage budgets, and really get as much as we can, because a lot of times they're nonprofit organizations, mission-oriented organizations that really have limited resources, but really have some great ideas. It's probably everybody, right? For the most part. But you know, my background has been instrumental, and our team really plays that role with our clients so that when we are ready to begin construction, we've pretty much got most of the I's dotted and T's crossed, right? So that's the goal through the design build process and this holistic approach that we take. So that's our niche.
So, one of the things that we found in our report is AI is becoming essential for small businesses. Can you tell me a little bit about how your company's employing it?
We're already using, most of us don't know, but we're already using most of what's out here. QuickBooks, MailChimp, TurboTax. I have yet to communicate with most businesses that isn't already using these platforms. And those of us who are small like myself, we outsource our accounting and our CFO services. So we have a team of 3 that really hones in on the day-to-day activities for USource. We meet regularly to see where we are, to make sure we're keeping up. And as CEO, one of the challenges is really the efficiencies. And how do we make sure that we're limiting duplicative efforts in the accounting process? And as we are a construction company primarily, it's every single project, as we were talking about earlier, is its own business, right? And we have companies that have multiple service lines, and they really require a very magnified approach towards accounting, towards maximizing operations, the efficiencies. And so for us, it's the gap, it's the information gap on what tools we're already using and how can they further benefit us in a way that can help us be more profitable. And we're already using it, but the question is, are we using it to its capacity? What more can be done to make sure we're not missing any of those added efficiencies and added tools that can help us? And so for me, I think that's prevalent for me and for many other businesses. We need the support.
I think that's an excellent point about the efficiencies that can be made for small businesses. It's a force multiplier. Michael, Intuit is key as well in helping small businesses grow. Can you tell me a little bit about how Intuit is working with small businesses and the technologies you all are working on?
Sure. First, thanks for having us, and thanks for the report. It is really critical to keep this focus on small businesses as kind of the lifeblood of the economy, and the technology that's involved with it. When we talk about AI and the things like that, getting these tools into the hands of small business owners is what is going to kind of be able to transform and move small businesses along with the rest of the economy through to the AI age. And part of that is reducing the drudgery, right? How do you take things, Shirley doesn't want to spend her time balancing the books, thinking about our cash flow projections, worrying about who hasn't sent an invoice or who hasn't paid an invoice. And the AI can do that for her, or figuring out how to do a marketing campaign and writing the copy for things like that, or creating the digital art. The AI can do that for her, so she can focus on getting into the community, making sure that the things that she's passionate about are there. We have other customers, there's one that I saw last week in Australia that is a graphic designer, and they make beautiful art, beautiful cards and posters and things like that, and greeting cards. And the founder, Amy, is dyslexic and has a really difficult time writing copy, doing communications and things like that. AI has saved her, what she said, about 80% of her time on spending those things, because it can do the first draft that she can then go into and overcome some of the things that she's lived with her whole life. And so being able to get these tools in these hands of small business owners, we know that those who have digital adoption, most small businesses go out of business, or 50% of them go out of business in the first 5 years. If they can adopt these digital tools, that survivability rate goes up to about 80%. And so getting them in the hands is going to be key and critical for the economy.
That's an excellent point. I think you brought about the efficiencies and cutting down time. We have a member of our own U.S. Chamber Small Business Council that's led by Tom Sullivan, and one of his members, a one-man coffee shop owner in San Francisco, said the same thing. Same amount of time saved on marketing time and cost, and it really is a game changer for small businesses. What are some of the challenges, Sheila, that your business is facing right now, and how is AI helping you?
Well, I would say we are using the tools that are available. to help with accounting, to help with managing project costs, to help with marketing, to sort of be able to take a step back and kind of see how we're performing operationally, how the cash flows, where the funds are going. For us, and one of the major goals is to really understand how the cost of goods are impacting the bottom line. I think most businesses are really honed in on cost of goods. And this is where, if we could really hone in on the details of where these costs are going, understanding the impacts of with the supply chains, what's going on with that, and seeing is there other ways that we could be more strategic about sourcing our goods, sourcing those products, because you're not going to really understand how you're performing unless you're really spending time in identifying or really assessing the data. Data is key to every business, and it's key to the growth of every business. So the more we can optimize that process, the more profitable and the more impact, ultimately. So that's where we are using the tools. We want to sort of understand how much more we can do with the tools that we have in hand and those that are forthcoming, or those that are actually being used by major, larger corporations that are necessarily unattainable. Can we focus on those being more attainable to us?
Sure. That's an excellent point too. You read about data, and one of the things we found in our report is nearly 3/4 of small businesses are worried about losing access to data and technology, harming their ability to grow, and it falls right in line with what we're hearing from small businesses around the country. It kind of gets a little bit, I think, into the policy question, and this isn't a U.S. Chamber event without talking a little bit about policy. Michael, what do you see as some of the policy challenges that we're facing right now to AI adoption, and how should we address them?
Yeah, I think there is a challenge in this, and with any kind of transformational change. I think right now the focus has primarily been on risk. And is it risk to the economy, risk to democracy, risk to national security? And I think those things need to be considered and need to be focused on. And there needs to be a kind of a comma and section to the focus where, okay, how can now this technology be an equalizer for small businesses so they can compete with large firms? How can it grow the economy? And how can we enable that to be those things? And so being able to think about risk and opportunity hand in hand and be able to enable that, it's easier to kind of legislate around the risk than it is around the opportunity. But I think part of it is also thinking about what laws already exist that are protecting data, that are technology agnostic, that are protecting the financial world, other things like that are technology agnostic, and not recreating the wheel and killing a budding technology before it gets to be in maturity.
One of the issues that we hear about is that issue of existing laws that are on the books. When our AI Commission came out with its report last year, one of the main features of that was that we already have laws to address things like fraud. We have things to address some issues regarding things like discrimination, but there might be new areas where the law has not caught up yet to some of the potential risks that are out there. And so we want to make sure that we have a risk-based approach when we get to that point. And I think that's a very good point.
Absolutely.
Another area is workforce. Every time we go anywhere across the country, we hear the issue of the impact of AI on workforce. Our report found nearly about 1/4 of small businesses are in some way using AI for talent, finding talent. I think, Michael, another point you mentioned that was really great was about talking about making sure small businesses just try out AI. And what we learned is that the more small businesses identify that they're knowledgeable about AI, the more they see its benefits. And so really just kind of want to tee up the question about workforce. Where do you see things going in the workforce side? How should we be addressing that?
When we started investing heavily in AI about 6 years ago, our CEO made a statement that he thought that AI would be as transformative to the economy as electricity was. And I think that remains to be seen, but I think we're on track to having that be that transformation. When electricity was being rolled out and we were electrifying the rural communities, it wasn't you didn't approach a small business and say, hey, do you want electricity in your small business? You said, hey, do you want lights to keep, in your shop or in your home? Do you want this new machine that's going to help, process things better, or a washing machine, or other things that are going to enable your business to go better? And once they saw the machine, once they saw the lights turn on, they could keep lights on in the morning and in the evening. Then they're like, yes, I want electricity. And I think similarly with AI, we need some kind of AI literacy programs to get it comfortable with it. But a big part of it is putting the tools and the applications in the hands so that people are using AI in a practical matter rather than saying, do you want AI in your business? And because otherwise it's saying, do you want electricity in your business, without showing why it improves my life, why it improves the way I do business, and saves me time. And what we're talking earlier with Shirley, the biggest, her most valuable asset is her time. And if AI can save her time, then that's worth it across the board.
I love that analogy about electricity because, it's been with us, obviously, since the dawn of time. We've learned to harness it in new ways, but I think that was kind of how AI was described. Everyone thought AI was invented a year and a half ago when it really wasn't. We've been using it for decades at this point and just beginning to add on to what we can see from it. Shirley, I'd love to hear more of your thoughts on the workforce side and how do we work on things like digital access and ensuring that small businesses have the ability to compete?
Yeah, it's access is, again, the key word. And for those of us who are already using it, getting a better understanding of the fact that we're already using it. I think folks, the term AI just seems so new. It seems it's like it's out there. But the information is where we're wrestling with. Like, what is it? But that we're already using it, and that's the bonus. That's the bonus, and it's the question of, from a workforce standpoint, as we're already using it to optimize operations internally, the infrastructure of our businesses is already benefiting. Most of them are, but how do we make sure that the workforce, not only in hiring and obviously, time is a factor, looking at ways to be able to, reallocate that time through the use of AI to secure the services, to be able to hire, to be able to, manage our operations, but also the workforce that's already in-house. Mm-hmm. How do we make sure that they're benefiting, that AI usage is even extending beyond just the executive team and the administrative, but for them who is on the ground, who's actually doing the work. And the great thing I was, saying is, fortunately, when you're looking at those tools that our folks on the ground are using, the first question is it compatible? That's the compatibility question. And that's where the tools that Intuit has are oftentimes very compatible with a lot of those softwares that we're using. And these are project management, construction management softwares that our folks are using on the ground. And this world of construction is going to continue to evolve to where we are wrestling with a workforce shortage, which we all know, a trade shortage, a skill shortage, and that is where AI, I believe, is going to be able to fill in the gap a lot. I think we're going to have no other options. And so it makes sense for us to invest in it, to really do what we can to optimize and make sure the platforms are there that we can sort of build off of.
I think that's a great point when you talk about shortages in terms of if we're going to get to the growth we need to maintain our quality of life, we're going to need to maximize our workforce. And we have shortages across the country, and if small businesses can't get off the ground with the resources they have, that's lost growth and for the economy, and that's why it's a real force multiplier. And I'm really, really glad you brought up the point about the worker shortage.
It's a real
piece.
multiplier. Yeah, that's the key.
Have a couple more minutes. Michael, do you have any final words for us today, or anything you'd like to leave our audience with today?
Well, listen, I think making sure that we don't leave small business behind in this conversation, I think, is critical. And they are such a key and an important part of the economy that the complication, the expense, the difficulty in acquiring AI needs to have a policymaker thought to say, okay, how do we do that comma and part of this discussion and make sure that we can help protect and enable and grow small businesses through this technology.
Excellent point. Shirley?
As we are looking at various SBA products, loans, different programs that assist us, making sure that there are also focused on equipping us so that we're getting benefits, we're getting opportunities to access those programs and those capital that's needed so that we can invest in that infrastructure that we need to continue to grow and compete.
Shirley, Michael, thank you so much. Really excellent points today. Really great to just hear from companies that are in the thick of it as small businesses and how technology is helping them. For folks that are interested in learning more about the Empowering Small Business Report, you can visit us at uschamber.com to learn more. But let's give a warm round of applause. Thank you very much. And next, I do want to welcome to the stage our next panel. It's going to address a view from the White House on AI issues. So we're going to be joined by the Director of OSTP, Prabhakar, and Rick Wade from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. So I want to welcome them to the stage, and thank you for joining.
Good morning.
Hey, everyone.
Good morning. Good morning.
Shall I
Come
come
on,
join
after
you
the
over
sausage
here?
and egg biscuits, we can do better. Good morning. Listen, thank you so much for being here with us. Obviously, Dr. Aretha Prabhakar, PhD, is Director of the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy and Assistant to the President for Science and Technology. I'm Rick Wade, Senior Vice President of U.S. Chamber of Commerce.
Great to be here with you all.
And let's jump right in. And the first thing is I could do is read your incredible bio, but your previous roles in your current position now as director, you've been prepared for many years to take on this exciting new opportunity. But start with telling us a bit about your background and your past.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's actually why I was so excited a couple of years ago when the president asked if I would serve in this role at the White House. 4 decades ago this week, or this month, I moved to Washington. I was fresh out of a PhD program in applied physics, and I ended up having a career that's half public service and half private sector. The private sector part was all Silicon Valley. And along the way, I was director of NIST. I know you just heard from Lori Locascio. I used to have that job 30 years ago. And then many years later, I was director at DARPA in the Defense Department. And in between, I spent 15 years in Silicon Valley, worked at a couple of companies, but most of that, a decade, was early stage venture capital. And I'll tell you what I learned from getting to work on science and technology and innovation from all those different perspectives, it really left me with an abiding sense of how big the things are that we can do in this country, and how every big thing we do takes this entire innovation system and much more. And wherever you work, you tend to see the world from that vantage point, but I've had the great privilege of seeing it from lots of places. And so when I think about the big aspirations that we have as a country today, what's always on my mind is how do we get all the pieces pulled together? And that means what we're doing on AI, how we're dealing with the semiconductor manufacturing challenge, how do we meet the climate crisis, how do we change American health outcomes? And the answer to every one of those questions is going to take a lot of people in a lot of different organizations, public and private. And that's what we get to do every day at OSTP.
Yeah, and you see it from both sides, private and
absolutely.
public sides. And it's not lost on me also, having worked at the Department of Commerce, you were the first woman to lead NIST, I believe.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
That was I showed up there in 1993, yep.
Wow. So today's conversation sort of centers around this concept of area of compute to compete, kind of highlighting that computing is so critical to our ability to compete in the private and public sectors, as well as geopolitically. In your role as current advisor to the president and your previous roles at NIST and DARPA, what are your thoughts on the importance of compute? And do you feel it will be more or less important today and in the coming years?
Yeah, well, the last 50 or so years tells us that it gets more and more important. And, I think we are still in the middle of this enormous information revolution that started with computing and semiconductors and then grew to networking and the internet and eventually the social media era and the mobile era. And now, of course, this chapter is being written by AI and how all the myriad ways that we're going to use it. So yes, I think that some of the biggest challenges to wrestle, but also some of the greatest opportunities are going to continue to come from the information revolution, no question.
And when you say the biggest challenges, what are some of those big challenges?
Yeah, and maybe just to say a few words about this White House's approach to AI. I started in my job in October of 2022, and ChatGPT came out in November of 2022. So guess what? I've spent a lot of my time on. And what really happened, and I think others here have been reflecting on this. AI was in our lives in so many ways, even before generative AI. But it used to be hidden. It was behind the price you got for an airline ticket or behind the diagnosis you got from your doctor. Generative AI with a chatbot, it's right in front of you. And it created a moment that Vice President Harris and President Biden together seized to say, look, we've got to get this right for the country because this is a very powerful force. And something I've really appreciated is that both of them kept promise and peril in frame the whole time. And I think a lot of the AI conversations these days, people have carved out, they care about a particular risk or they care about a particular application. And I think that's fine for individuals, but for the country, we actually have to get the whole, you got to wrestle the whole thing. And so the approach that the president and the vice president laid out was to say we have to manage the risks that come with these broad applications in order to seize the benefits. And through a lot of work with the industry, with an executive order, working globally, we have now, now this is, let's say, it's a year and a half ago that I first got to demo, generative AI for the president in the Oval. That was a blast. So now it's a year and a half later. Today I can tell you about specific advances that are protecting people from, for example, biased decision-making in healthcare or in loans and mortgage applications, and specific actions that have been taken to go after people who are using AI to impersonate a business organization or a government agency to commit fraud. So we're making some very specific, important progress on managing risks. And of course, all of your companies are doing so much to do we're all going to experiment right now to figure out how you use AI to change productivity across business in so many exciting ways. That, of course, there's a lot of hype. We're going to sort out the wheat and the chaff. I see that getting done in the private sector. We want that to succeed because we want those productivity enhancements that are real. It has to be done responsibly, and so we'll continue to focus on that. But part of what I've been paying a lot of attention to is how do we use AI to do the country's work, because we have public purposes for which we need to harness this powerful force. And I think about how we design and approve drugs. I think about how we close educational gaps for our kids. I think about how we deliver a better weather forecast for Americans in a time of a changing climate. Mm-hmm. Every one of those things is just barely becoming possible. You can see how with AI, if we do it right, wisely and responsibly, you could see each of those becoming possible. But AI is not magic. It's not just that you show data to a model and then magic happens. And so it's going to take some real work. And that is still ahead of us because as a country we haven't. Companies I see investing in AI and doing the work to sort this out, but in terms of the federal investment in research and development, we aren't yet we aren't going big where I think we have to on these kinds of things that matter for the country.
Yeah, and the way you talk about that, you think about the unlimited opportunities, right? Let me switch lanes a bit. I want to jump into research and development and the important role of government. Can you touch on why R&D investment is so important, and specifically in areas of AI and quantum, and then maybe provide your thoughts on what's at stake when those strategic investments don't happen?
Yeah. I think this is a critically important topic. And I want to start with how deeply woven the results of federally funded R&D are in our life. Of course, if you use GPS to navigate through traffic, every time you use the internet to stream a movie. But also, I've got an mRNA vaccine that's protecting me from COVID. I hope a lot of you do too. I have a friend who is still kicking because his cancer was defeated by a novel therapy. Think about solar panels on rooftops. Think about the clean air that we breathe. Think about even how we understand the biodiversity on this beautiful blue planet that we get to live on. Every single one of those things is only possible because of federal R&D. And yes, it took so much more from the industry and from communities and from policy, but everything I mentioned simply wouldn't have happened without federal R&D. So it's integral to our progress. And when you look to the future and you look at disruptive forces like AI, it is even more important. Now, let me back up and say where we are, because I think actually I want to make sure people understand that we are at a point where we have to get serious about getting back on track for federally funded R&D. And let me start with what's going on with the People's Republic of China, which, as everyone knows, has surged its capacity in every conceivable way. That includes R&D. Chinese R&D grew 27-fold in 25 years. They went from nowhere to, now they are the #2 spender on R&D, only behind us. And here's the benchmark that blows me away. Chinese spending on R&D is 40% greater than all of Europe put together, which I think is a really important warning sign. And we know that every country is using their R&D and AI advances to build a future that looks like their values. And unfortunately, some of those values are contrary to the values that we hold dear here. So we can't take for granted the position we had since the end of the Second War, where we had all the marbles and no one else got to play. Others are in the game, China in particular. That's what's happening outside our borders. And then inside, in our innovation system, today, the reason U.S. R&D still surpasses China's is because of the phenomenal growth in industry R&D. Industry spending on R&D in the United States has grown far faster than GDP. You know, you can see the intensification of the innovation economy because it's mostly the information industries as well as manufacturing and pharma. And those, we want those investments. We value what they do. I think it also, and federal R&D has bounced along, has not kept pace with GDP growth. It's still an important component, but it is dwarfed now by industry R&D. It's not a competition. I want industry to spend those dollars. But where we have arrived now is a place where the federal component is not able to keep up its part of the bargain, which is research for expanding the boundaries of knowledge, which is R&D for public missions, defense, health, energy, and the environment, and more, and a foundation that industry draws on every single day. When you hire a new graduate who did research in their university work, you're benefiting from federally funded R&D, which fuels university research. When you build on the intellectual property and the new research that's coming out of our federally funded research base, you're still building on top of that. And we know history shows us how much of the really innovative industry comes out of this federally funded base. In fact, the whole information revolution traces back to that. So we can't, what has happened is federal R&D has not kept pace with the growth in our economy and our industries and our ambitions. We should be the most ambitious country on the planet. That's who we are. And to do that, we need to make sure we keep up on federal R&D. So this is actually, I want to make a very direct request, because what I find is there's very strong bipartisan support for federally funded R&D. It's one of the things we actually all agree on. And I find when I talk to my colleagues in industry, CEOs and business leaders of all sorts, that they appreciate and value this. But this is a classic case of something that's important getting swamped by all the things that are urgent. And I think if we don't pay really focused attention, we're not going to like the future that we're building. So
yeah, and I think some of that also is telling the story of what R&D leads to. I've worked for years in a pharma company, and you know these drugs don't just happen. I mean, it's from a lot of investment. Let me ask you about tracking R&D. The issue there. These investments happens across so many different agencies, which makes it hard to track sometimes. Can you talk a minute about the specific is this a problem from where you sit, and what it means for U.S. competitiveness?
Yeah. Federal R&D in the United States, federally funded R&D is about not quite $200 billion, half of which is for national security. It's, think about product development for products that only the government needs, like weapon systems and satellites. The other half, the other sort of roughly $100 billion, is about half of that is NIH and Health and Human Services aimed at health. And then the rest, the quarter that's left, is the National Science Foundation. It's NIST, it's NASA, it's the Department of Energy, and then literally another dozen or more agencies, the Department of Transportation, the Department of Agriculture, the EPA. They all have R&D. And one of the tremendous strengths of how we have funded R&D in the public sector in the United States is that we have tied it to public missions rather than having it all pooled and having a Department of Science and Technology, which is an idea people have kicked around a number of times. But I actually think our model has tremendous strengths because innovation is richest and most effective when it is tied to mission.
That's right.
And so, I think that's the strength. And then the flip side, nothing comes for free. The flip side is how do we make sure that the different agencies that may have different missions but end up working on similar areas of science and technology, how do we make sure that's coordinated for maximum impact? And how do we make sure that it's visible and available to the rest of the country that needs to be able to take advantage of it? And those are many of the things that we work on from the White House in terms of running the formal coordination processes.
And it all matters with regards to our competitiveness. I mean,
Absolutely. The whole engine has to hum, and then it has to be hitched to the economy to deliver for the people in the end.
Since you were obviously at a U.S. Chamber event, and we're about the business of business.
Absolutely, we love it.
Kind of obligated. I want to ask you a question about how these investments impact the private sector, but it'd also be good to hear your views on how the investments help businesses, large and small, across every sector within our American economy.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, I saw it firsthand in the work that I did. When I briefly, for a year, I was CTO of a mid-sized publicly traded material science company. Every graduate we hired out of a PhD program, I was hiring someone who came to us with a set of skills that they learned on federally funded R&D. In my venture capital life, the companies that we started we were seed and early stage, so not surprisingly, a lot of the things that we started came out of university research. I had a wonderful experience with a company that I started with a couple of, a professor and a couple of brand new PhDs out of Berkeley. That came directly out of federally funded R&D. So I think those links are very real. And look, in America we love the lone hero narrative, right? So it's always about something that one great entrepreneur did. And I think we should celebrate those stories and also recognize that there's an enormous amount of effort that goes on behind each of those individual heroes.
Yeah. Finally, the president signed the Safe, Secure, and Trustworthy Development and Use of Artificial Intelligence Executive Order last October, which has sparked government action in a number of different ways and efforts related to artificial intelligence. And as the president's chief advisor here, if you could go back, are there efforts that you feel should have been added to the executive order, and are there things that the executive order tried to address that in your mind now are less important? How do you kind of weigh with where that started with where we are now?
Yeah. Let's see, that's less than a year ago. It was the end of October that he signed that executive order. It's a very broad executive order reflecting the breadth of AI applications and implications. And I will tell you, overall, I think what it has done is get the country set on the right path to think about AI and to start taking the actions that appropriately manage the risks and then lay the groundwork for us to go big and seize opportunities. Look, an executive order, the reason you do an executive order is to pull every lever under existing law, knowing that the capacity of the government can still step up and get things started. And that's exactly what he told us to do. That's why we put everything that we could think of across government that we could do to help get this right into that executive order. But of course, from the beginning, it was clear that industry needed to step up to its responsibilities, which I think many companies are doing, for example, under the voluntary AI commitments. It was very clear that Congress would need to act to resolve a number legal issues where we need new legislation. And they've made a lot of progress in their thinking. A lot of bills have been proposed, some of which I think could be very constructive. And we will continue to work on a bipartisan basis with Congress as they move forward. And we knew that the rest of the world, AI doesn't stop at the border, so we knew that working with the rest of the world was going to be important. We've done that with Europe in a way that I think has been helpful in, to some degree, getting the EU AI Act to line up more with the directions that we thought were important. And getting the United Nations. We proposed, and the United Nations General Assembly adopted the first ever resolution on AI. We had just an enormous number of co-sponsors by the time that got done. So these are the kinds of things that we've been able to do from the executive branch and the White House. We know that much more is needed. But the reason I actually feel very good about the progress is the fact that today, the FTC has made it clear. They have a rule in place that says that a company can't, no party can use AI to impersonate a business or a government agency to defraud you, right? Like that's actually something palpable that is protecting Americans today. Today, when you go to the bank and you get turned down for a mortgage or a credit card, that may be an AI, it's almost always an AI system that says yay or nay, but now you're owed an explanation so you can do something about it. And I think these very concrete ways, each one is small, but they are starting to change the relationship between people and this technology and putting people back in control in ways that I think are very, very important. There's more to do there, and I keep coming back to the reason we're solving all of those risks is so we can build a stable platform to go to the stars. And the research has started to do some of the big things like changing drug development and approval and changing how we produce weather forecasts. But there's a lot more work on that front to be done as well. So.
Well, listen, as an applied physicist, an engineer, and all of the work that you do today, the most difficult question I want to ask you as we leave, what do you do for fun?
I don't know. It's a privilege to do a job like this, but as you know, these jobs consume all of your time and effort. So I still get to cook an Indian meal with my DC daughter, which is one of the great silver linings of being here. Our home is California, but when we're in town, we get to see our DC daughter much more frequently, and she and I often cook an Indian meal together, and that's very therapeutic at the end of the week. So.
Wonderful. Well, when you want somebody to test it out, I'm in.
Okay, great. We got a volunteer.
Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much. What a pleasure.
Thank you.
Hey everyone, for our next panel, we'll be Accelerating Compute, Bridging Quantum and AI, featuring Kate Weber, Head of Governance and External Affairs at Google, and moderated by Denise Turley, Vice President of Corporate Systems at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce.
Well, hello, everyone. Kate, we've talked a lot this morning about AI, which is super exciting, but I'm really excited to talk and learn a little bit more about quantum computing and the work that you and your team are heading up over at Google. Yeah. So welcome. Thank you for taking the time to be with us this morning.
It's great to be here.
Kate, I know for me, when I think about quantum computing, I'm still a little bit confused. So I don't know if anybody else is, but I wonder if you could just help us to understand what that really means in somewhat simple terms that we can follow, or at least I can follow.
It's kind of a tricky concept for sure. So the basic idea here is that we are encoding information differently in these prototype quantum computers that are being built now. And what that means in more detail is, on your classical computer, the information at its basic level is encoded in bits, in zeros and ones. So with quantum computing, we talk about quantum bits. And those quantum bits encode information based on the laws of quantum mechanics, which are the laws of physics that govern very, very small particles, like subatomic particles. And that means that those quantum bits or qubits can be in a 0 or 1 state, but they can also be in a combination of 0 and 1 states at the same time. And this is where it gets kind of hard to explain in detail quickly. But kind of the consequence of that is that you can use quantum computers and this qubit-based information encoding to do different kinds of calculations, and calculations that would be very, very hard to do on a classical computer. Or at least we predict you will be able to do this. I should say that today's quantum computers can't actually do that many things that a classical supercomputer can't do, but we're scaling them up quickly.
Thank you. So now I know what qubits are. What do you think are the benefits of quantum computing at large? And I know we're not there yet, but.
Yeah. So yeah, we can actually we can do a lot of theoretical work to demonstrate that a future quantum computer will be able to run algorithms that would be essentially impossible on a classical computer. And some of the areas where we see these future quantum computers being really, really beneficial are, for example, simulating molecules. So molecules themselves behave according to these laws of quantum mechanics. So kind of the high-level way to think about this is you can use a qubit to simulate an atom in a molecule, and you can get a much more accurate prediction of how that's going to behave. So that has implications for things like drug discovery, for fusion energy development, for the development of better batteries. We also see, and I think we'll talk more about this later, some potential applications in the machine learning AI space, though kind of not across the board, not kind of making all AI better, but some specific AI sorts of problems. And then other areas like optimization, which is really important in many industries. The finance industry for optimizing kind of cargo and supply chain for many companies. So those are some of the areas.
Yeah, I mean, it's really mind-boggling to think about where we could be going with that. So tell me a little bit about what your team is doing at Google to really lead in this area.
Yeah, so Google has what we call a full stack quantum computing effort. The team's name is Google Quantum AI. Despite the name, we are not focused on AI for most of our work, but that means that we are building quantum computing hardware. Our hardware is based in Santa Barbara, California. It is what we call superconducting qubit based. So one kind of thing to note about this industry is it's early stage enough that people are using very different technologies to build qubits. And we don't know which of those yet is going to be the first to reach this large scale, what we call a fault-tolerant computer. But anyway, we're building this hardware. We have our own fabrication facility for these superconducting chips. They're similar to advanced semiconductor chips. So some of the issues that we're thinking about now with respect to semiconductors are important for our trajectory as well. And we also develop these algorithms and applications for both these current prototype quantum computers and the future fault-tolerant quantum computers, as well as all the software to run them on our machines.
Wow.
Yeah.
So how do you think that quantum computing kind of plays with AI on that?
I mean, we do anticipate there will be some kind of relationship. For example, if we can definitively demonstrate that quantum computers can do some optimization problems better, like essentially a lot of machine learning is based on this optimization kinds of work. We also have done some work to show that a quantum computer could be really effective at doing machine learning AI on certain kinds of data with quantum properties. So there's a whole separate field of quantum sensors where you can detect these the molecules in the blood, for example, which behave according to quantum mechanics. So if you took that kind of data, you could feed it in directly to a quantum computer, do machine learning on it, and that would be much, much faster than if you were doing it on a classical computer. What we don't yet have evidence for is, and in fact, we certainly think that the first generation of mature quantum computers will not be better at things like generative AI. They're not very good at processing large amounts of data because there's a huge amount of overhead in reading the data into the quantum computer.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So some of the things that we hear about with quantum computing, and we heard in an earlier session, was just security and encryption. Mm-hmm. So what are the challenges or concerns around that?
Yeah, so this is an interesting one because I think most people would credit this known ability for a mature quantum computer to break today's encryption. Like, that is the challenge. And that is also part of the reason we see so much interest in investment in the technology, because obviously that presents a huge national security risk. The good news is, and Lori Locasio talked a bit about this, right? NIST has recently finalized standards for what we call post-quantum cryptography. That is classical cryptography, right? It's not itself a quantum technology, but updating the cryptographic algorithms we use to ones that we expect to be resistant to quantum computers. The fundamental issue is that one of these problems that are really hard to solve on a classical computer that we think a quantum computer can solve is what we call factoring large numbers. So you have like a huge number and you figure out which two numbers were multiplied to get that number. That's known as factoring. That's the basis of a lot of today's encryption, and quantum computers are going to be really good at figuring out what those two numbers were that were used to multiply together. And there are other kinds of encryption algorithms that we can use that quantum computers would not be able to break. And so NIST has now standardized some of those. That doesn't mean we're at the end of this road. It's a huge challenge to migrate all existing encryption to these new algorithms. And so that is something that I think needs both awareness and resourcing across many industries and government.
We're already struggling with changing our passwords right now, so I don't know what that looks like. So as you're building and you're trying to solve for this new technology, you also have to think about, how am I also building it with these new requirements that have come out around safety and security? Mm-hmm. How do you approach that?
Yeah, and this is a particularly big. So, I mean, the PQC standards, those are important across the board, and many people at Google are working on that in terms of Google's products in general, right? Chrome already has some of these PQC algorithms, post-quantum cryptography algorithms, and we're working to update all of our systems. We also are thinking about security on the quantum computing hardware and software side itself, because obviously it's quite a sensitive technology. There's this known application that's a national security threat. Any kind of powerful new general purpose technology, I mean, you can imagine other sorts of national security relevant applications. And there's a lot of focus in that community within government about protecting the technology. And we are, of course, at Google, we have many information and physical security protections across the board, but we also have a heightened level of those for our quantum computing efforts. Yeah.
That's really interesting. So given what you've mentioned about security and also kind of piling on to what we've heard in prior sessions, how important do you think it is for the US to lead in this area? And what type of policy should we have in place?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's seen as a national security imperative, right? You don't want to be late to the party of being able to decrypt all this information that's relevant for national security. I think it's also really important, and this is the approach that the US has been taking, to think about this not as like a two-state race, but an opportunity for us to build on the strengths of our partners from like-minded countries, because building a quantum computer is a huge challenge. There are interdependencies, and we can't do this only in the US. We have many parts of our supply chain are in Europe. The talent here is global. We need to recruit from foreign countries. And so there's been a lot of focus on what those bilateral and multilateral agreements look like, how we can implement policies like export controls. So there were just a few weeks ago new export controls announced on quantum computing, and how to do that multilaterally in a state that, I don't know how familiar folks are with export controls, but the multilateral agreement that has traditionally governed them has broken down because Russia is part of that group. But the US and other governments have come up with this kind of arrangement where they agree on the side to put in place aligned export controls, so that we're not trying to comply with different export controls in different countries. So efforts like those are super important. And then, of course, I mean, we've had a few conversations here about R&D investments.
Yeah.
That's continues to be really important for quantum. We're at the stage where there's early commercialization, but there's also a lot of really fundamental research that continues to be needed for the field to progress. And so we don't want to lose sight of the importance of those investments.
So is this one of the cases where we are ahead of the game with our regulations and thinking about policy? Because how far away are we from having, because it's not here yet, right? We don't, how far away, if you had to guess, do you think we are from it?
Yeah, it's funny. Lori Locasio said she's heard estimates from between 5 to 100 years.
Wow.
So at Google, we would say we are probably 8 to 10 years from the first, maybe a little bit less, but from the first, you can define this in different ways, from the first fault-tolerant computer, which means you have tons of errors in these quantum computers today. You can only run a calculation for a few minutes before these errors take over and you can't keep running it. And so fault tolerance means that you can tolerate those faults, those errors, and the computer can run essentially, indefinitely and do these bigger calculations. And it also involves scaling up and many more qubits. There are lots of issues we need to tackle there. The first of those is coming in, I don't know, 8 to 10 years, but that's also not the version of a quantum computer that will break encryption. It's probably more like 15 years until we get there. We don't expect the first error-corrected, fault-tolerant quantum computer to be able to do that. That doesn't mean, we couldn't be surprised. I think you can always have surprises in these kinds of spaces, but there are really fundamental hardware challenges that need to be overcome. And I think we've seen fewer surprises when you have that kind of a situation where you need development on electronics, wiring, chips, like many different components in order to make this progress, versus something like what many view as sort of a surprise in the generative AI space, which was relying on large amounts of data, new models, but like kind of the fundamental hardware technology didn't change that much to enable that. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. So let's switch a little bit. We've talked about the amount of resources that something like this might take, right? So there's been a lot of conversation about sustainability.
Yeah.
How do you think about that? Is there a way that this type of technology could help solve for it as you're building it? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think, in some ways we're lucky that this is top of mind right now in the AI space, because it gives us an opportunity to focus on it as we grow and think about building our future quantum data centers. Quantum computers, relative to a data center, they don't use a lot of energy today, but we are still, as I mentioned, developing all of these supporting technologies, and we don't yet understand exactly what the energy footprint of a full-scale quantum computer will look like, but it's something that we have an incentive to think about as we develop it, right? It's not, the challenge on the AI side is not just an environmental one. Of course, that environmental challenge is huge and super important, but Google's data center team is having a really hard time even accessing and building those data centers fast enough. And so we have a business incentive to get this right as well. We are doing things like looking at what the energy consumption of our current quantum computers are, like predicting our chips, the types of qubit we're building need to be cooled down to lower than the temperature of interstellar space, one of the coldest places in the universe. That requires a technology called a dilution refrigerator. Those use energy. They also use helium-3, which we expect to be, procuring enough of that could be a challenge. So we're thinking about how to design those as efficiently as possible. What the sourcing for helium-3 is going to look like in the future. All those kinds of resource questions are really important at this early R&D stage.
So just one or two things for you to figure out, and then, we'll kind of have it. Yeah, you just mentioned quantum data centers, and I'm already thinking about some of the challenges right now, as you mentioned, with data centers popping up. So let's switch a little bit and just, what excites you about a future with this quantum technology? When you think about, this is why I'm doing this work, this is the future that I kind of see, what are you excited about?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're on the cusp. We've discovered some really cool applications for this technology. We could not have predicted when computers were first being developed in, the first supercomputers in like the 1950s, where we'd be now. And it's exciting to be working on a technology that has all this potential and thinking about how to harness the potential and also mitigate the risks effectively. I think we have a lot of lessons that we've learned from other technologies we can apply here, and that is a really cool space to be in, kind of a pre-competitive space where you can think about these challenges without as many of the business pressures yet, and so hopefully we can get it right. And things like some of our recent work I think is really exciting. For example, showing that quantum computers could help model a fusion energy reactor much more efficiently, and hopefully this will enable impacts in really positive spaces.
That's great. So on the flip side then, we talked a little bit about some of the concerns with security and or encryption. Are there other things that you worry about with this new technology?
Yeah, I mean, I think, so I when you have an unknown when you know that there will be applications out there that you don't yet understand, some of those could have negative consequences, right? I think that's true for any general purpose technology. And so we are definitely thinking about how to apply Google's AI principles, the approaches that Google Cloud is taking to kind of control how our technology is used for particularly sensitive applications. So on the sort of product side, that's a challenge and a focus. And then there are also just like development challenges we see for our own roadmap. Some of those are related to supply chain. There are huge supply chain issues for many industries these days, but for something like quantum computing, where you have, I've mentioned briefly, there are different kinds of qubits, right? They rely on very different supporting technologies and therefore have very different supply chains. So some qubit technologies need a lot of lasers. We need these dilution refrigerators, just as an example. There isn't a ton of overlap, and that means that we are having to work hand in hand with lots of individual suppliers, kind of basically fund their R&D to make exactly what we need, and there isn't that sort of scaling effect yet. And that's a problem that's interesting for policymakers. We've had a lot of discussions, but it's difficult to figure out what the right solution is when, if you pick one supply chain component that's important for Google, you're maybe helping us at the expense of another company who needs something totally different.
Interesting.
That's where these international partnerships can be very helpful, because there's another challenge that some of these technologies are mainly available overseas, and at least we want to make sure that we can securely source them. And then also just looking forward, what is the supply chain going to look like, and what will we need to do once we have more clarity on the technology development to strengthen it. We have challenges in other places too that many technologies see, right? Workforce development, there are the R&D challenges themselves, lots of areas to think about.
So the question on the top of my mind right now then is, do I get one? Like, will we get one? Or is this just for like research institutions and large tech?
Yeah, I think we can think of these like another kind of supercomputer for the foreseeable future. I would not expect in any of our lifetimes that you'll have a personal quantum computer. They're very large. They require these, supporting technologies that take up a lot of space and resources. And we expect them to be useful for these very specific problems. So it's not like you're going to be using them, to run an app or your mail.
Or my home robot that's doing my laundry.
Yes,
Okay. And I don't have that refrigerator thing that you talked about either, so I can't keep it cool. Kate, thank you. So as you think about, the work that you guys are doing, the excitement that you have, anything else that you would want us to know about this technology? Is there any sort of parting words you want to leave us with?
I think, it's a really important technology space to watch. It has a lot of promise. I think we do need to be careful and clear-eyed about where it is and how we sort of tell those stories of where we're going to be without without raising the temperature too much and implying that this is like, this is going to be the next generative AI tomorrow, right? There's a lot of promise, there are a lot of challenges. It's really important to invest, but we also don't want the public to think that it's like a technology that's mature now, because that will then create all kinds of problems for our industry in the future. But yeah, really, really cool space, and hopefully in the next decade we'll be using these
in the next
quantum
decade. We're going to hold you to that,
computers
Kate. I can see
for something,
people getting confused and thinking, it's all the same, AI and quantum, and really it isn't. But 8 to 10 years, that's when we'll have it. All right, guys, thank you so much. Kate Weber from Google. Thanks, Kate.
All right, thank you, Kate. Thank you, Denise. We are going to get a view from the Hill on AI policy. We're going to be joined once again by the Chamber's Tom Quadman, who's going to moderate a fireside chat with Congressman French Hill. Congressman Hill represents the 2nd District in Arkansas, and earlier this year he was named to the House Financial Services Committee's bipartisan AI working group. So without any further ado, I'd like to welcome Tom and the Congressman to the stage.
Thank you very much, Jordan. And Congressman Hill, thank you for coming. Appreciate it.
Glad to be with you.
And you and I are going to have to stop ourselves from slipping into discussion of arcane financial services issues. So if anybody starts hearing us talking about baby shelf registration, just give us a high sign. Sure. All right. So we've heard a lot today from the administration. We had the head of OSTP here, NIST, National Science Foundation, and obviously there's a lot going on with the executive order from the Biden administration. Can you talk a little bit about what's going on in Congress?
Sure. I think you've seen the Senate, under Chuck Schumer's direction, issued a set of pronouncements on artificial intelligence, a thought process there, and so the House is not to be left out of that discussion. So Speaker Mike Johnson and Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries created a House task force on AI that's very reflective of the House at large, represents a lot of our committees of interest, and I sit on that task force for the Speaker with Bill Foster of Illinois, and Dr. Foster and I serve on the Financial Services Committee, and so we sort of represent the Financial Services Committee's interests on that large House-wide AI task force. And then I co-chair the one, as Jordan noted, for the House Financial Services Committee with Steve Lynch of Massachusetts. We've completed our work. We released our report back in July, the House Financial Services Committee did. And it was basically, we took testimony from all the bank and financial supervisory regulatory organizations about how they were using it in their own organizations. Mm-hmm. And what their expectations were for those that they supervise. We heard from HUD modestly. HUD was singled out in the president's executive order, which I found interesting, but nonetheless, we heard modestly from HUD. And then we had a series of panels across all of our subcommittees of jurisdiction. So we had the private sector come in and talk about their use of AI, their expectations of how to supervise their activities from a regulatory point of view, a compliance point of view. So we had capital markets, financial institutions, housing and insurance, the real estate business at large, national security. The House Financial Services Committee obviously has a big national security component overseeing the Treasury and our sanctions policy and multilateral institutions like IMF and World Bank. Those were fruitful, and that's reflected in our committee's work. I think some guiding principles. One, people are not rushing to this technology. They're very cautious about it in the private sector among the people we surveyed in the, talking about the Financial Services Committee work. Secondly, that human was always in the loop as a guiding principle on the work. And then finally, and I think a very important component, no matter what aspect of the federal government you're talking about, are you in compliance with federal law, depending on what aspect you're talking about, and can you show your work? And I think the big challenge in machine learning and data analytics and the use of a database that produces outputs is showing your work. Right. Can you say that this set of mortgage leads that you generated through a mixture of your data and open source data using machine learning generated leads that were compliant with the fair lending laws? So those are the themes that we've taken, and I would say the House-wide group, which is co-chaired by Jay Obernolte and Ted Lieu, Republican and Democrat of California, has taken a similar approach, but it has the whole breadth of the economy with some very interesting sessions on health policy and education policy, for example.
How do you see that that house-wide effort going? Because obviously we had that Schumer group, and last year when we did this, when we had this event here, you know, Senator Young and I had a very good chat about that, and that was obviously in the beginning stages then. But how do you see the house-wide effort going?
Well, I think it's we've not been pushed by Mike Johnson and Hakeem Jeffries to jump to a conclusion. And I think, as you just heard in the the previous discussion, it's very hard to regulate something or set guiding principles when you don't even know how to define what you're talking about. And the application is so ubiquitous across the economy and across different business segments that it just doesn't lend itself to a one-size-fits-all sort of government pronouncement or even approach like Europe has taken in the EU. So we are looking for guiding principle legislation or approaches like that, and that we want to get ready for the next Congress. So I don't view this Congress in this House effort as to try to produce a flurry of legislative activity between now and December's sine die of the 118th Congress. I think this is more preparatory, more educational to members working on authorizing committees about how artificial intelligence affects their work and how it can be applied. And I would say, as the chairman of the Digital Assets Committee, working on all things regulatory related to blockchain, digital assets in the financial services space, you know, we want experimentation. So Richie Torres, Democrat of the Bronx, our great young dynamic Democratic member of our committee, we've co-sponsored a sandbox legislation that Mike Rounds has in the Senate. I think that's the kind of work we ought to do. And I was very disappointed that President Biden put out this, you know, large initiative by executive order on artificial intelligence, and yet his regulatory agencies disbanded their fintech regulatory sandboxes. Well, those are completely the opposite policy approaches, and I really still don't understand it. FDIC being a prime People's Exhibit A of that policy, which I disagree with. So I like the Mike Rounds bill, right? And Richie and I are going to carry that in the House. I think that's a bill that would have a lot of bipartisan consensus, and it allows the private industry to work with supervisors to find the right way to tackle some of these definitional problems and supervisory problems.
Well, you know, we had, just to stay on that for a second, you know, we've taken an approach with AI from the very start of most activities are already covered by law. There should be an inventory of the gaps, and then you should see what the risks are, and then if you need to do anything. And, just stay in the financial services space for a second, Chairman Gensler with the SEC, he likes to give a speech where he says, okay, we see a lot of firms are beginning to use AI, and, you've talked about what that pace is, but then goes to the next jump of, and it's going to cause the next financial crisis in the next 5 years. So we sent them a letter saying, maybe you should do things like concept releases or maybe roundtables, really to understand that, because very often the private sector is ahead of the public sector when it comes to that. But also to your point, which I think is an excellent one, of there should be a way to allow for experimentation. So, I'm really happy to hear that you're thinking of that rounds approach and pressing that forward, because I think disbanding those sandboxes was a bad idea when it comes to this.
Well, I think everybody's concerned about the jet fuel that AI, machine learning, and artificial intelligence methodology adds to the potential to do harm.
Mm-hmm.
Without any fancy generative aspect to it whatsoever, just literally the fact that somebody can go on an AI platform and say, create an investor presentation, an S1, 3 years of 10Ks, 3 years of 10Qs for this hypothetical company that follows the prompts I give you. That's, I think, scary to a lot of people. Or that I dial the 1-800 Citibank MasterCard information number and the voice comes on my cell phone and it's not Citibank. It is a spoofed, completely AI-generated front end that's taken over somehow my ability to communicate with that call center that I have a, quote, trusted relationship with. These are challenges. Mm-hmm. I think they're best dealt with by supervisors, law enforcement, financial institutions working together, and that sandbox environment facilitates that. And we need to have more of that, because I think that you will take what is now, I think, relatively rudimentary things like looking for spam in your email box, and you're going to go into warp speed in the kinds of spoofing that's going to be, I think, made available with business being the target.
Right.
Even more potentially than consumers.
Right.
I think consumer spoofing and the use of AI to facilitate a fraudulent activity will be high there, but I really think that it's concerning, and that's why I think dialogue, having these sorts of educational conferences, having people write about it, research about it. I've encouraged the members of our committee to go to their local universities, get them involved in local chambers of commerce to talk about this and how to handle what I think is a series of consumer, B2B, and information technology challenges as a result of it. But that doesn't mean we don't want to reap the benefits.
Right.
Either in the back of the house from a compliance point of view, or fraud prevention point of view, or lowering the costs to providing a consumer service, or reaping revenue opportunities by the creative nature of being able to do things faster and bringing to humans a different menu of choices to make based on the machine's ability to look at things quicker, faster, and more effectively, in some cases more effectively.
Yep. So I agree with you, right? We're not going to see a flurry of legislative activity between now and December on AI. But, we've got the Senate, as you mentioned. We have Senator Young, Rounds, and Heinrich, who come out with 80 different recommendations. You've obviously touched on one of those. You're in a unique position because you're both in the House-wide task force. You've run the task force for financial services. Where do you see commonalities between what the House is doing and what the Senate is doing? But also, do you see where there are differences in approach too?
Well, it's such an evolving field. I wouldn't cast aspersion like, I don't like the Senate list, it was too prescriptive, or, they did it in a time when they didn't even know what we knew 6 months later.
Right.
I don't think that's constructive. I think when the House finishes their work on a macro scale and we feed in work from our committees as well into that report, then I think it would be appropriate for the House and Senate teams to assess what should we have as priorities for the incoming Congress and work with the incoming administration on this. But I do think these guiding principles are important, which are machine learning has tremendous benefits for consumers and business in the American economy, have a continuation of America's dominance in the technology space if we do it right. And that we ought to have as a guiding principle a human in the loop in this early stage of development. As Kate said, this is like not even the first inning.
That's right.
This is not even the first inning. I mean, this is like my dad was, God rest his soul, I loved him. He was an early adopter of all technology, died at 96, a couple of years ago. But he called me one day, like in 2010 or 2011, he goes, 3D printing. Buy every stock. I said, well, Dad, you can make like a coffee mug with it. He goes, no, I got to have it because this is going to game change the world. I mean, they're going to make a Boeing airplane with machine, with 3D printing. I said, okay. So I said, I promise you, you're going to lose money on this suggestion. But okay, that's fine. If you want this in your account, we'll take care of you. I can't tell you how much money was lost in that venture. But the idea is, early adoption is good, but these are, even when you have adoption rates like of ChatGPT that dwarf color television, VHS, the cell phone, internet adaptation, I got it. But embedding that in a useful way and adopting it is a work of years, when even if you go to MIT and talk to the best people in this space, they'll show you data from 2017 and 2018 that they just kind of balled up the paper and thrown in the trash can because it's moved so fast. So let's experiment, let's adopt, let's comply with federal law under our obligations, whether you work at the Pentagon or and you're under the FDIC supervision, and let's keep a human in the loop as we think through the best way to adopt AI.
So one of the agencies that has put something out is actually Treasury, right? So they recently came out and they were asking for submissions on AI. We submitted a comment letter with them. Actually, we had a meeting with them last week. But you joined with Chairman McHenry, and the committee sent over some comments over to Treasury. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think in our society, our federal society, our collaborative regulatory system that we have in our nation that's grown up over the last 2 centuries, I love the fact that governments opened and asked for comments and thoughts and views from not only the Hill, but across all sectors of the economy, because I think that's how that contributes to getting it right. But I think we've just expressed our concern not to be preemptive here and to take the approach that I've described, which is to be more reticent and not disrupt something I think has great benefits.
So just before we came on, there was a discussion on quantum, right? And quantum is going to be a game changer when it does come online, and particularly when it starts to marry up with AI. And one of this, and you were alluding to this earlier, but the financial sector is going to be one of those that's really going to be impacted by quantum. And as you and I know, right, speed in the financial sector is awfully important. So from your vantage point in terms of the speed issues, but then also the cryptology and cyber issues that quantum poses, how have you been looking at quantum?
Yeah. Well, I serve on the House Intelligence Committee, and that's a particular interest and focus of the House Intelligence Committee. We've been to MIT and the Lincoln Labs associated with MIT, working particularly in a classified setting on AI from a national security point of view and quantum. And cryptology is game-changing for security and secure transactions. So it has tremendous benefit there, but it also is, fraught with national security risks as well. So there is an absolute moon race to building the first successful quantum computing operation. No, there's no doubt. And I've gone out to Berkeley and seen one at work and walked through all the technology that leads to that and the burdens of it and the cost of it and what's yet to be done. So this is, again, something that's very emerging but very important. And you speak to it because, I think we've gotten away from, we have a Fourth Amendment privacy in our Bill of Rights that we really just are eroding dramatically in our country as we give more and more personally identifiable information, PII, to just one enormous database after another that just is a target for hacking and malware and misuse. And the United States government's the biggest source of those databases. I mean, the private sector certainly has had their risks, and I think the future of quantum and speed and code breaking and cryptography is going to make that a bigger challenge, but also a safer issue for the storage of that data. But we're in a gap right here that I don't know how long it's going to last, and so I don't support the federal government demanding more big databases to which people have access to, because I don't have confidence in FinCEN or the IRS or CFPB or some of these big federal agencies, the SEC, and keeping that PII encrypted, protected, and separated from the actual thing they're looking for. I've got a huge problem for that. And so I just generally don't support that because I know it's not necessary. The federal government has unlimited sweep ability to ask private sector regulated participants for information about a particular matter, as opposed to just monitoring everybody's behavior. The CFPB wants every transaction level data on credit cards. FinCEN wants every beneficial ownership of a pass-through limited liability company that somebody has for their farm. CAT, the Consolidated Audit Trail at the SEC, wants to monitor and have every single person's brokerage account statement released to them daily. I mean, I just don't see the benefit of that.
Yep.
And I think if we had quantum and we had cryptographically ability ways to secure those databases and prevent them from attack or theft, that would be good, but we're not there yet. And so I have privacy concerns being eroded even faster through application of mal use of AI in the interim. I think it'll make our work tougher to secure that PII information.
So you mentioned you're on the Intelligence Committee. You're also on the Foreign Affairs Committee. And you and I have dealt with in other contexts, we've dealt with other issues in terms of international, particularly such as the CSDDD, human rights disclosures in Europe and what that impact's going to be on businesses. But you mentioned it before about how EU came out with the AI Act. But then as we're having, and I mentioned earlier, we've had meetings, UK, EU, Ireland, Japan, South Korea, et cetera. And very often what we hear back is, well, we want the U.S. to be the leader because we have shared values. The U.S. is in the technological lead, so we want to work together. How do you see this all playing out on the geopolitical scale?
Yeah, and it's such a global competition now, and everybody is using technology in such a way that does not know national boundaries. And we've had that emerging rapidly for 30 years by starting out with your AOL dial-up account, sending an email to a friend of yours that now lives in Milan. It didn't cost you anything, and they got it seamlessly, and it was amazing, right? So, but that then breeds this issue of data localization rules, taxing, I think, trade barriers, non-tariff barriers on taxing of certain behavior like we've seen in Europe, over-regulation, compelling an American business to be sued in Europe under a legal framework there. So that's why I'll just go back to my work in digital assets, we need to set that standard and do it in the right way, and we'll see, I think, a lot of the globe conform to that, whether it's on stablecoin legislation or on the Irish CFTC, the Commodity and Future Trading Commission, or the SEC's oversight of digital assets, and I feel the same way about AI. But I don't think we should have a competition to the bottom in starving these technologies. And maybe that might be the EU approach.
Right.
It's very French. We will not succeed if we take that approach.
Yep. Well, it's interesting. One of the European members of Parliament I met with, we were having a private conversation, very up on these issues. And that's exactly the point he made: is we killed our innovation.
Yeah.
And that's not something we want to do here.
We shouldn't want to be emulating and imposing a regime that reduces in fewer jobs, lower GDP, lower take-home income, and exacerbated broadens the wealth gap. We shouldn't be taking that. And I really think that's the struggle that Europe has, in addition to a declining population and some other challenges. But
Yep.
we do a lot of things wrong in this country, but we do not do innovation wrong. And I just don't want to see us pushing that offshore. We had testimony last week on blockchain development. So simply writing applications for an operating system. This is not complicated. This is not something to be afraid of, or that it somehow hurts Americans. And somewhere between 14 and 20% of blockchain developers, coders in this country have left the United States in 2023 to go to another jurisdiction that they believe is more conducive to that development, whether it's the United Kingdom or the EU in that instance, or Singapore, or the UAE potentially. And I think we need to be cognizant of that.
So we're at time, but if I could just make one pitch, and I know you know this from your work on crypto and blockchain, but with the work that we're doing with AI and all the infrastructure you have to have with that, particularly data centers,
right.
Energy is becoming, or will be, a big issue, and energy reliability. So we're going to be doing some more on that. We'll want to come in and talk to you. But with the wide expanse that you have on this, I just want to make sure that that was on your scope.
Well, look, this is where, I'm not going to get partisan here, but this is where House Republicans on the Financial Services Committee have been for a decade, which is that we would invite all of our colleagues on both sides of the aisle who believe that you can power the world through renewables only, go to EIA.gov, and you could have read every year that that's not doable. It's not going to happen. And it's not going to happen before any made-up number like 2025 or 2030 or 2050. And you've got to be realistic about this, about moving to a less carbon-dependent energy source. And if you're serious about that, you need to be pro-nuclear and join those of us that are trying to get safe, clean, no disposal problem, nuclear permitting and expansion. And you read about it, and that's the cover of Barron's 2 weeks ago. So I'm not preaching to the choir here. I know that it's expanding, but I've been there for 20 years. So welcome. And that doesn't say you shouldn't, generate renewable energy, but we don't have any ability to store it. So it's of no value to the grid. And if you want to run a company, run a country, build data centers to do what Google wants to do, you need abundant baseload power, and that is not provided by some farmer trading world-class rice-producing land in the state of Arkansas, the largest rice grower and exporter in the United States, trading that land from rice to put up solar panels built in China. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. If you could store it, it might. So I think you're right on point. And I think we need to have a long conversation about that. And I was glad to see a lot of people, including people in Europe, backing off these unrealistic, they were never realistic objectives about converting to predominantly, I won't say only, predominantly renewables, which they would define as hydro, wind, and solar, in a world that will not support that. And EIA.gov has said that and preached it under Democratic and Republican administrations for, as I say, over a decade. So I hear your message. I think that's important. And I'm glad to see that even the climate-only lobby recognizes that too, and recognizes that maybe actually natural gas is a transition fuel and that maybe nuclear is a good idea. And I think those things are important to U.S. consumers and businesses. And it'll also prevent maybe a country like Nigeria from being bankrupted by these failed global goals and get back to seriously taking care of their citizens too. So,
good French.
Thank you. Appreciate you.
Thank you. Look forward to that. Jordan, come on up and close us up.
Jordan.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Congressman. I want to thank everyone here for coming out today on a little bit of a gloomy day, but I think we've seen the future is bright with these types of technologies. I want to thank some folks on the Chamber team for making today happen. I want to thank Ashley Eisner and Matt Mullins, Michael Richards, Matt Furlow, Lindsay Rosen, Richard McGlone, Imani Bentham, and others for helping to make this day a success. I also want to thank our sponsor, Qualcomm, as well, for being a great partner today also. What have we learned today? For the smallest of small businesses all the way to national levels, in order to compete, we're going to need compute. And in order to lead in that, we're going to need the right policies in place to get there. And so I think what you can count on us to do is we're going to go out and fight for the right policies to ensure that we maintain leadership and competitiveness, whether that's fighting for a single true national privacy law, ensuring America's framework for AI is a national risk-based approach to AI, or promoting the quantum initiative. We're going to be out there fighting in the Hill and in state capitals for that to happen. But want to thank everyone for joining today, and if you want to learn more about what we're doing in the tech space or any of the other work we're doing at the Chamber on even things like energy, you can visit us at uschamber.com. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next year.